The mother of the villain, Nanpei, in traversing the city, is the esteemed Duchess. However, she's a cannon fodder character discarded by her villainous husband. To save her own life, the invincible Alyssa decides to take bold action. When her villainous husband is angry, she pretends to be in danger and unable to be rescued. If someone speaks ill of her husband, she's absolutely the first to defend him. After a few rounds of these combined tactics, her arrogant husband is indeed wrapped around her finger, constantly seeking affection. But Alyssa, being level-headed, plans her escape. Being independently beautiful is the ultimate truth. Who knew that halfway through her escape, she discovers she's pregnant? Her husband chases after her relentlessly, catching up and embracing her slender waist. "Where are you running with my child?" Thinking back to 7 years ago, due to a car accident, the woman's soul unexpectedly transmigrated into the body of the novel's cannon fodder character, Alyssa, the mother of the villain Nanpei. The original Alyssa in the novel lost her parents early on and grew up with uncaring, practical guardians. Due to extreme lack of affection, she clung to her husband like a leech. Perhaps she was truly too bothersome, and in the end, she met her demise at the hands of her husband. Alyssa certainly doesn't want to die tragically. She has 10 years left before her doom. As long as she changes her fate before then, everything will be fine. During her first meeting with the Duke, he immediately demands she become his daughter-in-law. His words imply she's useless, and he looks down on women. He believes a woman's life should be spent at home bearing children. Then she can comfortably enjoy her husband's wealth. This speech completely disgusts Alyssa. How dare he talk about having children to a girl who hasn't even matured yet? It's truly outrageous. Aren't men supposed to have it easier than women? They gallivant under the guise of work, and when they return home, they just yell and shout. In the end, they naturally take all the credit. As she fumes to herself, the Duke points to the contract on the table. "Sign here." Looking at the marriage contract, Alyssa doesn't hesitate. She picks up the pen and signs. As long as she doesn't have children and doesn't cling to her villainous husband, her survival won't be a problem. She can live comfortably in the Duke's mansion and receive a hefty divorce settlement. Such a good deal. Refusing would be foolish. With this in mind, she's full of energy. She just needs to persevere for 8 years, then make a fortune and fly far away. Under the goddess's witness, she, alone, marries her unseen husband. Looking at the lavish room provided for the young mistress, she's so surprised her jaw drops. Ornate decorations, a closet full of haute couture gowns. This is the life of a noblewoman. She lies on the bed, overjoyed, but the thought of her unseen husband keeps her awake. As Nanpei's father, her husband, Liehard, only exists in memories. Although Alyssa has thoroughly read the novel, she doesn't understand her husband's personality. She only knows that in Nanpei's memories, he's a terrifying person. Silently praying her husband never returns, she finally succumbs to sleepiness and drifts off. Unexpectedly, she's awakened by the sound of the door opening in the middle of the night. Rubbing her eyes, she looks over. A black-haired young boy is walking towards her. His fierce appearance makes him look troublesome. He startles her so much that she clutches the blanket and trembles. Seeing her clearly, the boy's face is full of disgust. She's so small he almost didn't see her. He turns to leave, but the door is locked, the speed so fast it makes him question reality. The boy curses and bangs on the door furiously. Alyssa is terrified, but she also realizes something. This child is her husband, Liehard. Suddenly, a gust of wind blows, even though the doors and windows are clearly closed. Looking at the whirlwind surrounding the boy, she realizes this is the Lublin power. It's the omnipotence to freely control the wind, a power only those with Lublin blood can inherit. At this moment, Liehard is enraged, gnashing his teeth and intending to find whoever locked the door. But he merely summons his power. Turning his head, he looks at Alyssa with red eyes. She thought her life was over. Unexpectedly, the boy just quietly laid down on the sofa. Even though she was terrified, she still wanted to greet him. After mustering up her courage and introducing herself for a long time, he showed no intention of acknowledging her. She could only sulk in frustration. Although she didn't understand his character, one thing was certain. The boy was very rude. Sure enough, the next morning, she was ignored by her young husband again. Traditionally, on the first day of marriage, a newlywed couple should not only greet their elders, but also have breakfast together. But Lionheart left her alone early in the morning and went to confront the Duke, demanding to annul the marriage. This was destined to fail. According to the Duke, she was merely a vessel for bearing children. If she didn't fulfill her obligations as the heir, she had no right to hold the position of young Duchess. His words were clearly a threat. Not only did she fail to dissolve the marriage, but because she hadn't eaten breakfast with his young wife that morning, the Duke lectured Lionheart in front of Alyssa. He insisted they share a room. Lionheart glared and reiterated his absolute refusal. How resolute he was now, how much he would regret it later. He flung the door open and stormed off, leaving Alyssa alone once more. The Duke had called Alyssa to him to give her something, a book titled The Beautiful Slave Wife. It clearly looked like frivolous nonsense. She politely bid the Duke farewell. She instantly felt hopeless. She actually had to study such antiquated drivel. Her fate was truly miserable, but this was just the beginning. That evening, they forced her to sleep with her husband. Even if she was unwilling, there was nothing she could do. As she cautiously peeked into the room from the doorway, she was surprised to see Lionheart already there. Looking at his feet propped up on the sofa, a smile crept onto her lips. Judging from the conversation between the grandfather and grandson earlier that day, the Duke only saw his grandson as a tool to continue the family line. And this tool was constantly rebelling. The enemy of her enemy was her friend. She slowly approached, offering the young Duke a dazzling smile and an invitation to friendship, one that seemed impossible to refuse. But some people just didn't get it. He called her ugly. She wanted to jump on him and slap the rude boy silly. However, she could only suppress her anger. After all, he was her meal ticket, but she wouldn't give up. For the sake of her divorce plan, she had to win over her husband. From that day on, besides her daily lessons on bridal etiquette and how to conduct herself as a duchess, she also had to endure repetitive, tedious lessons. Thankfully, once the lessons were over, she had all the time in the world to spend in the library. It was the place that helped her understand this world the most. But her relationship with Lionheart hadn't progressed at all. Her husband still kept his distance, engaged in a protracted war with the sofa. This couldn't go on. She sighed. "Come sleep in the bed with me. I won't bite." Lionheart stared wide-eyed. Before she could finish her touching words or even register his surprise, he quickly extended his small hand. "Come on. I'll just hold your hand while we sleep." To divorce her 10-year-old husband, Alyssa extended the invitation to share a bed. She had clearly said they would only hold hands, but in the end, she embraced him. "I'll just hold your hand while we sleep." Alyssa, in order to bridge the gap between them, resorted to such childish lies. Unexpectedly, this only earned her more disdain from her young husband. Whether it was her theatrical displays or her genuine concern during the day, her husband saw it all as seduction or even as being the Duke's lackey. He immediately voiced his suspicion. No matter how she explained, he simply wouldn't believe her. She knew he had a strained relationship with his grandfather, the Duke, but she hadn't realized it was this bad. Not long ago, she had become a homeless orphan, and the Duke had taken her in as his granddaughter-in-law. Unexpectedly, her explanation, this further confirmed Lionheart's suspicions, because the one who's done something wrong is the first to bring up family history. Alyssa was dumbfounded. This child had been lied to his whole life. The only reason he agreed to the marriage was so that he, an orphan, could have a better life. She hadn't expected this child to spread rumors, insisting he was forced into this by the Duke. It was impossible to reason with him. Since gentle persuasion wasn't working, she would use facts. She remembered from the original novel. At the founding of the empire, there were 4 families, each with the power to control wind, fire, water, and earth. They deliberated on who would become emperor. The heads of the Luberin and Kello families, who controlled wind and fire, both desired the throne. The Kello head ultimately prevailed. To prevent tyranny, the Luberin family was to act as a check on the imperial family. But as time passed, the oath was forgotten. The imperial family grew powerful and desired the Luberin family's abilities. Rebellion became the perfect excuse. If Lionheart didn't want to marry the princess, someone still needed to fill the position beside him. Alyssa placed a hand on her heart. She didn't want children or the position of duchess. Once she was of age, she would leave. But until then, she needed her husband to play along. Lionheart, who initially thought his little wife was naive, realized she was quite clever. While agreeing to the deal, he didn't forget to emphasize her promise to leave. That haughty look on his face, just wait for it to be wiped away. Unexpectedly, In the middle of the night, the blanket behind him became soft and fluffy. At first, it was quite enjoyable, but he quickly realized something was wrong. He opened his eyes abruptly. He was being completely hugged by his wife. He was startled like a little wildcat. Weren't they just supposed to hold hands? How did it escalate to cuddling? The pillow falling on the floor didn't matter. What mattered was that he had been pushed to the very edge of the bed. He was furious, but the cold air left him with nowhere to direct his anger. He extended a hand and gently pulled the blanket over his wife. What a nuisance. To get rich quick through divorce, a 10-year-old girl decides to first win over the villainous Duke. After successfully snuggling up to him with coaxing and deception, she then acts sweet and innocent while making requests of the Duke. Not only did she satisfy her desire for finance lessons, but she also took the opportunity to address the household affairs. It turned out that Alyssa was reading a book when she woke up that morning and was drawn to the commotion outside. A child no older than 5, instead of playing, was either mopping the floor or serving tea and water. Now, he was even cleaning a chandelier he could barely reach. He looked so precarious, as if he might fall at any moment. A little kid doing the work of 5 people. Wasn't it obvious he was being bullied by the adults? Alyssa walked over with a smile. After confirming her suspicions, she was instantly furious. You're the ones who are supposed to be working, yet you're ganging up and bullying a child so you can go out and play. After comforting the little servant boy, a smile crept onto her lips. She was going to take care of this. Arriving at the Duke's office, she politely curtsied and got straight to the point. She wanted a new personal maid, because her current one couldn't do anything besides make the bed. After successfully prompting the Duke to explain himself, she feigned ignorance and recounted everything she had seen and heard. The Duke, of course, saw through Alyssa's little scheme, but he still ordered an investigation. After all, without a clear strategy, he wouldn't easily discard this card. Alyssa seized upon this very point. She successfully got rid of the lazy maids, and from then on, she endlessly exploited the Duke's reluctance to let her go to satisfy her own little whims. As long as it wasn't a major issue, it wasn't a problem. However, the Duke remained steadfastly against the idea of her learning about finances. She had to resort to her trump card. She explained that she simply wanted to take advantage of the time spent in lessons with her husband to strengthen their bond. How could the Duke refuse anything that hinted at the possibility of a grandchild? Alyssa was full of confidence. She was determined to try every possible way to make a fortune. Full of spirit, she pushed open the classroom door. Leihart's face was full of disdain. What are you doing here? Hearing that his little wife wanted to help him share the burden of work. Although his words expressed comfort, his face was full of scorn. A cough came from behind. The white-bearded teacher had arrived. After only a few minutes of lecturing, he gave Alyssa a small classroom task. Try to use the abacus to calculate a few numbers. Simple 2-digit numbers were manageable, but with the more complex 3-digit numbers, Alyssa was clearly struggling. After all, the Chinese abacus isn't something one can master in just a couple of lessons. Fortunately, her villainous husband suddenly had a burst of helpfulness. He patiently taught her the correct operation, hand over hand, earning the teacher's repeated applause and praise. Watching his little wife quietly whisper, "Thank you," Leihart, initially indifferent, was charmed by her adorable smile. Her genuine soul melted his heart. Only after his little wife reminded him did he realize his hand was still touching hers. He immediately reacted like a startled kitten, his face flushing red. He tried to convince himself that this wasn't helping, but merely reviewing the lesson. But as soon as he said it, he contradicted himself, his eyes glancing at her repeatedly. He sure backtracked quickly. This 10-year-old boy, in his first marriage, was already learning to act like a grown man, pursuing his wife. He had been sneaking glances at her during class. But now that class was over, he pretended not to know her. His little wife enthusiastically invited him out to play, kindly wanted to buy him some mouth-watering cookies. Not only did he refuse her offer, but he also mocked them as something only children would like, making her fume with anger. He returned to his room to read, but the sound of thunder and lightning outside disturbed him. Thinking of the monsters that frequently appeared in spring, continuing to read was impossible. "What a nuisance," he muttered, but despite his sharp words, he picked up his cloak. Stepping onto the windowsill, he transformed into a bat-like superhero and soared into the wind. Meanwhile, the little wife he was worried about was chatting and laughing with her personal maid, Annie. Alyssa, having bought the cookies she craved, was overjoyed. She dreamed of opening a pastry shop after her divorce. But before her dream could be realized, disaster struck. With a bang, the carriage began to shake violently. Both mistress and maid were thrown around inside. Precious cookies scattered across the carriage. Before she could even cry, the presence of death approached again. An ugly monster clung to the carriage window, its claws scraping against the glass. The two huddled together in terror, thinking their time was up. Thankfully, Liehart arrived just in time. Facing the ferocious monster, his eyes were filled with killing intent. He controlled the swirling thunder and lightning, forming a large, spinning sphere. With a single, stylish move, he crushed the monster. In an instant, the monster was obliterated, leaving behind a delicious aroma. Even the children next door were drooling. Watching his wife comfort Annie, he couldn't help but feel Sheen come. She was clearly injured. Did she not see that, he thought. He assumed he'd finally gotten through to her. But when he heard his wife mention repaying him, he couldn't resist his sharp tongue. He scoffed, "How can a little cookie eater like you repay me?" As they say, the more arrogant one is, the quicker the comeuppance. Following the monster attack, the emperor sent an invitation. Ostensibly, it was to invite the duke's family to a hunting event. In reality, he wanted to take the opportunity to see what the girl who had taken the princess's place was like, and perhaps find a way to eliminate her. Everyone knew the true intention, but the prideful duke accepted nonetheless. After half a month of arduous travel, they finally arrived in the imperial capital. The young couple immediately began their preparations. After all, they couldn't afford to be outdone in such a setting. They dressed Alyssa like a doll from a shop window, exquisite, beautiful, and undeniably cute. It was the first time she had seen her husband looking so handsome. She couldn't stop praising him in her mind. He clearly saw her reaction, yet turned his head and pretended not to know her. Preoccupied with criticizing her husband's rudeness, she failed to notice his reddening ears. What made her even more speechless was, in the carriage, Liehart kept staring at Alyssa, like watching a sunset. Is it my nearsightedness, or am I exceptionally beautiful today? She wondered. Seizing the opportunity, she asked, "You keep staring at me. Is there something on me?" Unexpectedly, her words proved prophetic. There actually was something on him. Watching her husband remove the loose thread, Alyssa was mortified. Quickly changing the subject, she asked what the princess and crown prince were like. At the mention of the two, Liehart didn't hold back. "Scum and non-recyclable trash," he declared. Alyssa helped her husband out of the carriage, still pondering his words. What would it take, she thought, to make my already harsh husband even harsher? But as she looked up, the noble's undisguised stares gave her a clue. Being a young bride from the South, she was mocked as a country bumpkin. Casually assigned a lower table, Alyssa wanted to lash out. But as the Duchess of Lublin, even at 10 years old, she had to learn to endure. Fortunately, she had a decent husband, usually so arrogant. He knew how to be protectively domineering. Without a word, he sat beside her, faced with the crown prince's provocative questions. Her young husband simply replied coldly, "My wife's place is my place." He didn't care if he was mocked as a lovesick fool. As the children settled, someone couldn't resist showing off, pouring a full glass of 82 red wine. The crown prince swaggered to the table, drunkenly swaying his glass, and gave a silver-haired boy a free hair wash, causing everyone to roar with laughter. Alyssa was furious. She'd seen the crown prince and princess bullying others upon arrival. Now they wouldn't even let them eat in peace. Her husband's scum comment was spot on. Without hesitation, she grabbed her handkerchief and helped the boy. But her action was bound to upset certain people. The crown prince praised her kindness, then lifted a full wine glass, saying he wanted to properly welcome his new friend. Just as the wine was about to spill, a sudden gust of wind seemingly knocked the princess's senses loose. Everyone was momentarily blinded. When the wind died down, the crown prince was drenched in his own wine. He flew into a rage, yelling at Liehart like a rabid dog. If he hadn't been restrained, who knows how badly he would have been beaten. Even while retreating, he continued to spew threats. Can't he just leave quietly? Alyssa thought. As her husband stood to leave, she followed, wanting to thank him for intervening. He denied doing anything, but she still wanted to express her gratitude. "My husband," she began. Liehart froze. Without a word, he turned and left. Alyssa assumed she was being bothersome. She didn't see the blush creeping up his neck. Using a stained dress as an excuse, Alyssa skipped the tea party and went to the grove with her maid, Annie. There, she stumbled upon a conspiracy. Several suspicious men were plotting to eliminate the young Duke of Lublin. Fearing for her husband's safety, she almost sought out the royal knights. But she couldn't rule out the possibility that the men were acting on the emperor's orders. After careful consideration, she decided to seek help from their own knights. She ran all the way, arriving breathless and sweaty. But her information was dismissed as a joke. Seeing their dismissive attitude, she played her trump card. The Duke is the only heir to the Lublin dukedom. If something happens to him, do you think he'll be spared? You may not be sworn to me, but you're sworn to Lublin, she declared. With that, Alyssa grabbed the reins and, without a second thought, rode into the forest alone. While she knew her husband wouldn't die, she still worried. Having transmigrated into the original Duchess, the plot might have changed. So, no matter what, she had to see for herself. Suddenly, a fierce wind blew ahead, far stronger than she'd ever experienced. She knew something must have happened to Lionheart. Other children were still playing in the mud at age 10, but he was already married. Seeing her husband in mortal danger, she immediately rode with her soldiers to rescue him. She witnessed her husband single-handedly fight off dozens of men. The assassins were crushed like ants. The other children present were stunned, but Alyssa was filled with worry. After her husband finished the fight, she was the first to rush to him. Seeing the blood seeping from his waist, she quickly reached out to support him and brought him home to care for him. Although her husband's injuries weren't serious, she unexpectedly received bad news. Her maid, Annie, stammered nervously, having overheard the truth. The mastermind behind the assassination attempt was actually the Duke. His own grandfather had tried to harm his grandson. Alyssa couldn't understand it. Recalling the comings and goings of the cabinets at the Duke's mansion today, could it be that he was using his grandson to prove that Lublin was still powerful? Thinking of this, she trembled with anger. No wonder the Duke had only glanced at her husband indifferently before leaving when he was injured and unconscious. Although she instructed Annie to keep quiet, she was extremely conflicted. If her husband learned the truth and left the Duke's mansion, her good life would be over. But she couldn't just focus on her own enjoyment and ignore the suffering of others. So, when her husband woke up, she told him the truth. Unexpectedly, Lionheart was remarkably calm, as if he were already accustomed to such things. It turned out this wasn't the first time. He was born a bastard, considered a disgrace to the family by the Duke. If he hadn't been quick-witted, he would have died countless times already. The reason he eventually became the heir was a car accident a year ago that took the Duke's only son and daughter-in-law. So he wanted revenge, to personally ensure the end of this family line. Learning of her husband's painful past, Alyssa was both shocked and heartbroken. This child had endured so much pain. She suddenly understood the original Duchess's death in the novel. After all, being manipulated into having a child, Lionheart would certainly find it difficult to accept. She held her husband's hand. "I'm willing to stand by your side, always." She was like a warm little son, warming the broken heart of the tragic young man. Lionheart was instantly captivated, but their time alone didn't last long. Before an uninvited guest arrived, it was Answer, whom they had just met at the banquet. Seeing his young wife dressed so beautifully and smiling so happily when she had just said she would stand by his side, yet now she was meeting with another man alone and leaving him, a sick man, in bed. He was so angry that his wound no longer hurt and he could walk easily. He stormed over to his wife's side, speaking to the guest without any politeness. Sensing his wife's increasing coldness, he pretended to be dizzy. Alyssa had no choice but to leave. Lionheart insisted on personally escorting her back to their room. His jealous behavior was almost comical, but the other man had come prepared, quickly presenting his invitation, hoping to see Alyssa at the banquet. Lionheart was so angry his jaw nearly hit his forehead. Other 10-year-olds were still doing homework, while he already had someone to care about. Because of his wife's words, "I will stand by your side," Lionheart began to fall for her. Unexpectedly, his wife turned around and chatted and laughed with another boy and even planned to attend the banquet. It made him incredibly jealous. Before going to sleep that night, he subtly hinted that his wife shouldn't get too close to that man. But, annoyingly, he ended up being lectured by his wife. She even brought up that scumbag, the crown prince. Feeling the implied insult, he blurted out, "Didn't you say you'd stand by my side?" Seeing his wife feigning ignorance, he was instantly speechless. How could she be like this? He buried his head in the blankets. ignoring even his wife's goodnight. But later, in the dead of night, he poked her cheek. You should only care about me. This possessiveness is unmatched. Yet the next day, he started acting aloof again, sitting in the carriage without saying a word. Alyssa was a little puzzled. Last night, her husband was so reluctant, she thought he wouldn't go. It turned out it was because he was shy. Thinking about it this way, he's quite cute. And today, her husband was a little different. When he got out of the carriage, he even offered his hand and said he wanted to lead her. The person who always gave her the cold shoulder was now being so considerate. Although a little unaccustomed, it felt very reassuring and nice. As soon as the family of three entered, they attracted everyone's attention and praise. It was a complete turnaround from the last royal banquet. But faced with such enthusiastic displays of goodwill, Alyssa couldn't be happy. That connection was bought with the Duke's scheming against his grandson. After meeting the Count, the young couple were assigned to a separate area. It was the gathering place for children during the banquet. However, besides the little host and Sir, no one seemed to welcome them. After all, they had greatly offended the crown prince. But the table was full of treats, so why care about anyone else? Unexpectedly, after just greeting Sir, her husband started being sarcastic again. Alyssa directly stuffed a dessert into his mouth, complaining that he was quite talkative today. Food hand-fed by her must taste delicious. While he ate, he didn't forget to tease her. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through her foot. Her heel was rubbed red and swollen by her new shoes. Beauty truly comes at a price. She left her husband and went to sit alone on the balcony sofa. Only then did she feel like she could breathe again. She unintentionally overheard a conversation. News of the crown prince's serious illness came from the hallway. It was said he was badly frightened. Alyssa didn't believe it. The crown prince wouldn't kick the bucket so soon. He was probably faking it. After all, that day in the forest was quite embarrassing for him. Unexpectedly, while gossiping, the topic turned to her own husband. She heard that Liehart's mother was a cart licker. It was said he was an illegitimate child and had even been a mercenary. That's why he was so violent and rude. Alyssa trembled with anger. She stormed into the hallway and confronted them all. She wasn't intimidated by their chatter. Compared to these rotten people who only dared to gossip behind others' backs, her husband was infinitely better. The pink-haired girl was about to lose the argument when an arrogant silver-haired girl joined in that you're very arrogant. This is the crown prince's fiancée. The pink-haired girl was about to make Alyssa bow that I think your upbringing was wasted. I, the esteemed young duchess, need to bow to someone who isn't even anything yet. Every word hit the mark, making the silver-haired girl flush with anger. Alyssa continued to scold them as she left. Unexpectedly, her husband followed her. Seeing his trembling hands, she immediately felt Shin Kong. Her husband's gaze darkened. There's no need to bother with these pests. Even the hardest rock can be worn down by dripping water, let alone a person's heart. Since she had decided to stand by her husband's side, she couldn't let others speak ill of him. Conversely, if she encountered someone speaking ill of him, she had to blow them away like a storm. Liehart suddenly understood. Even though she was scared and trembling, she still fought for him. So that's what she meant. Remembering how his wife was limping earlier, he immediately squatted down. Alyssa was quite surprised by her husband's attentiveness. Although it felt a little awkward, it was warmer than she expected. A group of shirtless, sweaty men made the young wife drool. Her eyes were practically glued to them. Suddenly, her husband appeared behind her. Alyssa nearly jumped out her skin. Facing her husband's questioning gaze, she nervously laughed and praised the training knights for being handsome. She was so enamored, she even wanted to learn swordsmanship. Unexpectedly, she just said it casually, and he not only took it seriously, but also volunteered to teach her personally. She had to give him a mental thumbs up. You're so great. But now things had gotten out of hand. She really had no interest in learning swordsmanship. She quickly made a few polite excuses and fled the scene. Watching her retreating figure, Liehart's competitive spirit flared. Just handsome, huh? The next day, the handsome guy, Dan, appeared. Thompson, who had only been at the Duke's mansion for a year, was usually diligent in his work and lived a decent life. But he didn't know where he had offended Duke Xiao. Last night, in the dead of night, the Duke suddenly sought him out, saying he wanted to spar with him today. Liehart stared out the upstairs window, waiting expectantly for 2 hours. This didn't look like sparring at all. Only when that figure appeared did he beckon with his finger. Immediately, he raised his sword and rushed forward, striking another handsome pose. With a few swift moves, he had his opponent on the ground. Surely this would impress his wife. But when he turned to look at the upstairs window, The person was gone. That evening, after washing up, he shyly asked Alyssa what she had been doing. Hearing that she had watched him spar, he was overjoyed, but pretended not to know. He couldn't keep up the act for even 3 seconds, though, before Alyssa pulled him into their room. She looked him over, worried about the wounds from the previous 2 days. She even started to pull up his shirt, startling him so much he broke out in a cold sweat. He quickly changed the subject to the map on the side. Alyssa was studying the various territories of the empire, occasionally asking for his opinion on which would be the most suitable place to live. This made him curious as to why she was asking, but the answer stunned him. Alyssa was actually planning where to live after their divorce. He then remembered their agreement from a while ago. Recalling his arrogant attitude at the time, he was filled with regret. He quickly inquired where she wanted to live. To his dismay, the place she mentioned happened to be very close to the Answer family estate. How infuriating. After that day, the Duke's mansion was peaceful for a while. However, at the end of spring, news of war arrived. At times like these, the Crown Prince and other imperial princes were required to go to war to boost the morale of the soldiers. Unexpectedly, not only did the Crown Prince feign illness, but the Emperor also invoked an agreement and ordered Lionheart to go to war in the Crown Prince's place. Seeing the Duke's anger, Alyssa was extremely worried. Although she knew her husband wouldn't die on the battlefield, the incident at the hunting grounds was still fresh in her mind. Moreover, in this household, she was the only one on her husband's side. "No, my husband is strong," she told herself, but her eyes inexplicably reddened. When she saw her husband, however, tears streamed down her face. He might not die, but that didn't mean he wouldn't get hurt. How terrible that would be. She rushed forward and hugged him tightly, sobbing uncontrollably. She truly didn't want him to go to war. Lionheart, about to head off to war, was being pressured by his grandfather to have a child. He used the heir's position as a threat. But Lionheart wasn't going to obediently listen. He'd sooner give up his position. The Duke was so angry he slammed his fist on the table. "If you die, Lublin will be swallowed up by the royal family." To protect the family, his hands were stained with the blood of countless people. He wouldn't hand it over to anyone, not even in his dreams. Watching the Duke's rage, Lionheart couldn't help but feel a bit cynical. Compared to the life of his grandson, the man feared the downfall of the family more. But Lublin was destined to be destroyed in his hands. Therefore, he would definitely return alive. Children were truly unnecessary. Before he could finish his rebellious words, Alyssa agreed. Upon hearing that her husband had to go to war, her eyes had become swollen from crying. Rather than wasting time with the Duke, she preferred to spend more time with her husband. Compared to the first time she was locked in the room, this time, they were clearly much more harmonious. Lionheart was about to say something when Alyssa covered his mouth. Holding his hand, she said, "The first time should be with someone you love, not dictated by someone else's will." She then reassured him that she had bribed the physician who was coming the next day for the confirmation, and Annie would also help. Deceiving the Duke wouldn't be a problem. After all, whether it was the first night or the first kiss, it should be shared with someone you love to be truly happy. Looking at her tender expression, Lionheart froze. Love was a foreign concept to her. Having lost her mother at a young age, she was sold by her uncle and later abandoned by her so-called father. She even nearly died at the hands of her own grandfather. Her life had been nothing but darkness. But Alyssa was like a ray of light, suddenly shining into her world. Not only did Alyssa worry about her, but she would also fight others in the streets to defend her. Alyssa would even cry for her. Although Lionheart didn't yet understand what love was, she knew one thing for sure. She didn't want to lose the only person she had. The Emperor quickly set a departure date for the expedition. Officially, the enemy forces were approaching menacingly, but in reality, he wanted to send Lionheart to her death. So, before leaving, Lionheart went to the forest every day to fight monsters, returning each time covered in wounds. Alyssa was both distressed and angry. Regardless of Lionheart's consent, she would pull open her clothes to help tend to her injuries, making Lionheart blush with embarrassment. Determined to return alive, Lionheart trained tirelessly every day, even dragging her subordinate, Thompson, along for the grueling ordeal. But exhausting herself before the expedition wasn't a good idea. The final days should be spent with the most important person in her life. After all, she didn't know when they would see each other again. This was originally something she used to persuade herself. But Lionheart seemed to take it to heart, remembering how Alyssa had asked her to come home early last night. She ran back without a second thought. Upon entering, she accidentally woke. Alyssa, who had fallen asleep waiting for her, Alyssa frantically tried to celebrate her birthday, but Liehart didn't even know her own birthday. Looking at the birthday wishes on the card, Alyssa thought she might be angry. Unexpectedly, Liehart smiled. She even decided to take a day off to take Alyssa on a date, which made Alyssa overjoyed. However, that night, the villainess from the original story appeared. Liehart had clearly made plans with Alyssa. It was truly outrageous. Her 10-year-old wife was going to war the next day, and Alyssa not only gave her a loving hug, but also a blessed safety necklace. Liehart was incredibly touched. She decided to tell Alyssa a secret. There was an escape route in this room. If you're ever in danger, leave from there. Hide anywhere you can. I promise I'll come back for you. Although she was still so young, Alyssa felt reassured. She then urged Liehart to go to sleep. She absolutely had to wake up early to see Liehart off. But once Liehart fell asleep, not even a god could wake her. So, Alyssa made Liehart pinky promise to wake her up. Liehart agreed verbally, but had no intention of doing so. While Alyssa slept, Liehart began her one-sided farewell. Don't get sick. Don't be sad on your own. Goodbye, Alyssa. I'll be back soon. A light kiss became the last sweet memory of their youth. When Alyssa woke up the next day, Liehart was already gone. She had left without a word. Alyssa was both angry and heartbroken. They had made a promise. How could Liehart leave without saying goodbye? She hadn't even fulfilled her duties as a wife. Fuming, Alyssa grew angrier with each passing moment. One second, she was stubbornly insisting on giving Liehart a piece of her mind. The next, she was a heartbroken mess, whispering Liehart's name and urging her to stay safe. From that day on, Alyssa became an outsider in the household. The maids blatantly ignored her, and the old Duke didn't acknowledge her existence. Thankfully, she still had the sweet Annie. Otherwise, her life would be truly miserable. Just as she was consoling herself, she overheard the maids talking outside the door. A blonde maid was encouraging the others to steal, claiming that the young Duchess wouldn't return alive. After all, it was clear she had been sent to die. They had to look out for themselves. Alyssa, enraged, threw open the door. She wanted to know what they meant by looking out for themselves. The two maids were instantly terrified. The more timid one immediately began apologizing, but the bolder blonde maid remained defiant, even going so far as to taunt Alyssa about being abandoned once the young Duchess died. How dare she say such a thing? Alyssa glared at her, her eyes blazing with anger. Immediately kicked the blonde maid out of the Duke's mansion. And by the way, warned Levy that if anyone dared to act rashly again, they shouldn't blame her for being ruthless. A month had passed in the blink of an eye. Everyone was saying that Liehart would lose the battle. Although she had great faith in her husband's abilities, she couldn't help but feel uneasy. Just as she was trying to reassure herself, Annie brought good news. Duke Xiao had won the first battle. She stood up in surprise. As expected of my husband, the weight on her heart finally lifted. But some people wouldn't be as happy as she was. She confirmed the Emperor's birthday with Annie. A good idea instantly sprang to mind. Those annoying people, it's time for them to bleed a little. Her 10-year-old husband was suffering on the battlefield, while the Crown Prince was enjoying a banquet at home. How could Alyssa tolerate this? The moment she and Jesse entered, the prepared show was about to begin. Alyssa wore a polite smile, her eyes locked onto someone in front of her. The Crown Prince thought today was still his stage, but the adults couldn't stop talking about Duke Xiao. After all, he was only around 10 years old and had already made great contributions to the empire. What talent! Hearing this, the children seized the opportunity to flatter the royal family, attributing Duke Xiao's victory to His Majesty's good judgment. They were ostensibly praising the emperor, but it was a clear dig at the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince awkwardly agreed, but inwardly he was fuming. If his father hadn't made him feign illness and given the chance to go to war to Liehart, perhaps he would have already won a victory. He wouldn't be subjected to these comparisons now. He was fuming when he suddenly heard laughter behind him. Turning around, he saw Alyssa chatting and laughing with two nobles. Isn't that the Duchess of Xiao? The Crown Prince, with his entourage of children, initially intended to find fault. But Alyssa not only had a genuinely radiant demeanor, even her smile was captivating. When Alyssa inquired about his health, he actually felt a little embarrassed. He said something about it being his father's birthday and how, as a son, he couldn't be absent. Alyssa then put on a worried expression and stammered, "There's been no news of the Crown Prince. How could there be rumors that he's feigning illness to avoid going to the battlefield?" Judging by the Crown Prince's expression, he clearly felt exposed. Her words implied disbelief in the rumors. The crown prince vehemently denied it all. As expected, I misjudged him. Faced with this sweet, innocent act, the crown prince immediately took the bait. He announced on the spot that he would join the volunteer army on this expedition. With his arrogant demeanor, he had no idea what a foolish decision he had just made. Alyssa would soon let him know. The Duke presented a luminous stone worth 200 million, and together they offered birthday wishes to the emperor. The emperor feigned politeness, saying how could he accept such a valuable gift. Before the Duke could speak, Alyssa quickly chimed in, flattering the emperor's generosity. For example, the crown prince just expressed his intention to join the volunteer army on this expedition. What could be more valuable than that? Ignoring the emperor and empress's displeased expressions, she showered the crown prince with praise. The crown prince is so brave, truly remarkable. With the crown prince on the expedition, we are sure to achieve victory. Her flattery not only ensured the crown prince's departure for the war, but also earned her the Duke's genuine approval. He even specially arranged for her the deputy position, typically reserved for the mistress of the house. Alyssa now felt refreshed and invigorated. Everything tasted delicious. When the volunteer army departed, they would carry belongings from families to the knights on the front lines. Hearing the household official say this, she immediately wrote a letter, hoping it would bring her husband joy. Every word and phrase expressed her anticipation. She never imagined the war would last 7 years. Looking at the contents of the letter, Lionheart couldn't suppress the smile on his lips. The once arrogant young boy had now grown into a handsome, doting husband. He traced the dried flowers in his hand over and over, carefully taking something out from his chest. It was the safety necklace his wife had given him with a farewell kiss before he left. His heart ached with longing for her, and only these small tokens could offer him solace. Thompson finally arrived, but he was too late. The remaining enemy troops had already been eliminated. Duke Xiao grumbled about his slow arrival. He's truly going to be wrongly accused. Even the fastest feet can't keep up with someone who can fly. His real purpose in coming here is because the emperor sent an envoy with a personal letter. Not only will there be a grand celebration for the army, but Duke Xiao will also be rewarded with whatever he desires. But our Duke Xiao only wants to go home. The celebration is for the army anyway. It doesn't matter whether I'm there or not. Her husband, whom she's longed for day and night, is about to return. She's overjoyed. The divorce papers she's prepared for years are finally about to be put to use. She just has to wait until the goddess permits it. That is, until she reaches the age agreed upon with her husband for the divorce. Then she can leave the Duke's mansion and be free. Thinking of this, Alyssa felt a sense of relief. She had finally made it. She said goodbye in advance, feeling both happy and a little lost. Late at night, she looked through the letters her husband had sent over the years. His personality seemed as dull as ever. She wondered if he had become unattractive. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew across the balcony. She stood up in surprise. The wind felt so familiar. In the blink of an eye, Lionheart appeared on the balcony. Long time no see. Alyssa. His white shirt made him look especially handsome. It felt like a dream. Alyssa's heart was pounding. She wondered why he had returned so early. The news she received that morning said he would be back in a few days. "Because I missed you." As he spoke, her husband took her hand. She was flustered, thinking he meant he missed his homeland. But she blushed to the tips of her ears. Lionheart couldn't help but smile, his eyes full of affection. When his wife asked if he wanted to bathe, he said, "I've already bathed." He took her hand and placed it against his cheek. "Oh, you want to feel?" His action startled her. He wasn't like this as a child. Worried he wouldn't be comfortable, she offered to sleep on the sofa. He poked her forehead. "Who said you wouldn't eat me up? So, it should be all right to sleep together, right?" He teased her until she laughed and agreed. But he didn't expect her to fall asleep so quickly. Even her sleeping posture had become demure. She no longer clung to him suddenly. He could only kiss her hair. Such a pity. Yes, it's been a whole 7 years. He had grown up. Alyssa had also risen from a young woman with no foundation to the position of lord, step by step. The north lacked food in the winter, but fortunately, the iron ore was dense and of high quality. So, she had the unemployed citizens help the blacksmiths make farming tools. Then she used the tools to trade for food from the south. This solved the territory's food problem and allowed them to earn gold coins by selling farming tools and weapons. The elders present held her in admiration and respect. 7 years separations weren't uncommon. As the territory's population and power grew, the emperor, who was already wary of Lublin's prosperity, became even more restless. Initially, because of Leihart's prowess, he had summoned his advisor, Reamer, seeking a method that was both justifiable and lethal. It was this mustachioed man who suggested exploiting the four great families' sense of alliance and having the crown prince feign illness. This led to Leihart replacing the crown prince on the battlefield. Later, with the Duke Bedreddin, Alyssa took over the territory's affairs and changed the management style. He hadn't taken it seriously. Now, the Lublin territory had both wealth and soldiers. He hadn't expected this young woman to be so capable. Now, Duke Xiao was returning as well, but there was no need to panic. He would eliminate Alyssa before then. After 7 years of marriage, their first reunion felt like a dream to her. In the dream, her husband was handsome and well-built, and even his flirting felt real. Unfortunately, Duke Xiao was still on his way back to the city. "If it's you," made Alyssa even more confused. The butler brought news of her husband's return. "Then let's go. Open the city gates." Trumpets sounded. The victorious knights entered the city, following Duke Xiao. After 7 years, her husband finally returned. Something felt off. He looked just like he did in her dream. As he drew closer, she had a bad feeling. "Good morning, Alyssa." So last night wasn't a dream after all. He even dared to smirk. Before she could say a word, Leihart was called away by the Duke. It seemed the Duke was quite ill, yet all he cared about was hurrying Leihart to produce an heir. "Since you don't love the girl I sent, then hurry up and have a child with your wife." "He's completely out of his mind," Leihart fumed, ignoring the rest of the Duke's pointless rambling. He turned and left. Being pressured to have a child after winning a hard-fought battle was ridiculous. Tonight, he was determined to drink his sorrows away. The knights raised their glasses in celebration. He just sat there sulking, ignoring even his wife. "My lady, have a drink. This barrel of ale, bigger than your face, represents the knight's heartfelt gratitude." He scowled darkly. Alyssa completely ignored him, even stopping others from trying to persuade him. Alyssa stood up, holding the massive tankard, her expression suddenly serious. After a few welcoming words, she raised the barrel. "To the heroes of Lublin." Unable to resist the enthusiastic atmosphere, she chugged the ale. Her impressive drinking stunned not only her husband, but also the knights, who gave her a thumbs up. "That's our lady." After several large gulps, she was so drunk she could barely speak. But when someone complained to her, she immediately became protective, her words so nonsensical that the complainer was left dumbfounded. "Speak of the devil." Her husband took away the 9th barrel. Pouting, she whined, "Can't we play a little longer?" Her husband chuckled indulgently. "Of course not." She playfully refused to leave. "That you'll have to carry me. I'm as heavy as a pig." The next second, he swept her up in a princess carry, his strength surprising. "You really are quite heavy." He carried her home in front of all the single knights, as sweet as a newlywed couple. Alyssa, however, was drunk as a skunk. He tucked her into bed, but she grabbed his hand. Mumbling, she reassured him, "Don't worry, I'll just hold your hand while I sleep." He looked at her tenderly. "But what am I going to do?" Just holding hands probably wouldn't be enough now. It was the first time the couple had seen each other in 7 years. Alyssa woke up with a pounding headache, vaguely remembering her drunken antics. She was mortified. She'd never been so embarrassing in her life. What would her husband think? Suddenly, the door creaked open. She pulled the covers over her head, pretending to be asleep, but couldn't resist peeking. Her husband was wearing a sleep robe, revealing his toned chest. He looked amazing. Even the droplets of water on his face looked delicate. But then he suddenly took off his robe. Alyssa nearly died of embarrassment. Her husband was too casual, but she couldn't bring herself to look directly at him. In the blink of an eye, he had dressed and was walking towards the bed. She squeezed her eyes shut, her heart pounding. Her unconvincing acting couldn't fool her husband. "How long are you going to pretend to sleep?" Resigned, she sat up. Before she could explain herself, he handed her a hangover remedy. Taking the cup, she tentatively asked if she'd done anything too embarrassing last night. "Like what?" he asked with a knowing smile. His cryptic response filled her with both shame and curiosity. Had she really done something that bad? She felt out of sorts all day. Besides the headache, the hangover remedy was more bitter than wormwood. She swore she'd never drink again. A commotion outside drew her attention to the balcony. It was Leihart. He looked so handsome when he was working. Whose husband was this, anyway? He hadn't just avoided an awkward phase growing up. He seemed to have become much gentler. As she admired him, she muttered to herself. Perhaps her husband heard her, because he suddenly looked up. She instinctively ducked out of sight. She couldn't understand why. Was it even a question? Of course, it was because of love. It's just that he hadn't realized it yet. The butler formally came to the door, saying the Duke had something to discuss. Without a doubt, the Duke was here to push for a grandchild again. If he dared to try anything sneaky behind her back, she'd reveal his secret about treating her like a sister. Just imagining that scenario terrified Alyssa. So this time, she truly gave in. Wearing a sheer nightgown, she forced down her unease, constantly reassuring herself that it would be all right. After all, her husband wasn't the type to force her. But in the original story, this was around the time Lihart's son was conceived. She wasn't ready yet, but her husband came up behind her, looking at his angry face. She desperately tried to explain, afraid of being misunderstood. Unexpectedly, her husband draped a sheet over her. Not only did he speak kindly, but he also told her not to mind the Duke's words. After this, he turned and left. She wanted to say something more, but he was already gone in a flash. She knew her husband was doing this for her. So, for everyone's happiness, she had to get a divorce as soon as possible. To save her 10th life, he only returned to his room late at night. Unexpectedly, tonight, his wife caught him in the act, and she wanted to sleep separately. He panicked. Why was Alyssa suddenly crying? He thought she felt uncomfortable being with him. That's not true at all. Then why do you leave as soon as it gets dark? Liehart struggled, stammering a lie about enjoying walks. In reality, he was afraid of losing control. Every night, seeing his wife asleep made him happy. He didn't want to give up the chance to sleep beside her, but he couldn't bring himself to say it. Luckily, his wife was interested in his walks. Walking in the sky? What's that like? Do you want to try? Alyssa asked, full of anticipation. Putting on a windproof cloak, she took her husband's hand, but she was still a little worried. What if I fall? Just hold on to me, and you won't. She awkwardly embraced him. Liehart's lips curved into a triumphant smirk. He swept his wife into his arms in a princess carry. Suddenly lifted off the ground, his little wife froze in his embrace. The wind rushed past her ears. She kept her eyes tightly shut, afraid to look, until her husband told her to open them. The several thousand square meter Duke's mansion looked like a tiny toy house from this distance. It felt like a dream. Thank you, she said, her face full of adoration. Their nighttime flight infuriated the Duke. Not only did he rearrange Alyssa's room, but he also wanted to send new concubines to his grandson. Even though she was this sick, the old man hadn't forgotten about continuing the family line. Alyssa felt helpless. She went to discuss countermeasures with her husband. Unexpectedly, as soon as she opened the door, she saw her husband's freshly bathed, well-built physique. Both of them blushed instantly. She quickly composed herself and explained why she was there. Suddenly, there was urgent knocking at the door. A servant rushed in, panicked. The Duke, his lordship. This was completely unexpected. Looking at the man on the bed, struggling to breathe, Alyssa felt both grief and pity for the Duke. He had toiled his entire life for the family. Even on his deathbed, he hadn't thought of resting. She didn't understand. You can't take it with you. Why do so much? Hearing her husband wanted to be alone with the Duke, she politely excused herself, leaving Liehart alone. I originally wanted you to live a little longer, to see all your dreams shatter with your own eyes, to live in agonizing despair and suffer. But I never thought you'd leave so peacefully. He called him grandfather for the first time, but his eyes were filled with hatred. Now, the dukedom is ours. The Duke gasped, his face contorted, filled with hatred and resentment. He ended his life. Liehart closed his eyes. Please watch me from hell. Meanwhile, outside the Duke's city, a young boy, covered in wounds, looked fearfully behind him. Monsters never appeared from that direction before. Why have things become so strange? They were a match made in heaven. Yet, she kept thinking about divorce. Every day, she worked overtime, teaching her husband how to handle affairs. She handed over the financial power, but then she received a letter from her friend. The retirement villa, under construction for 5 years, was almost complete. Alyssa felt a pang of reluctance. She should have asked for a divorce when her husband returned triumphantly. Unexpectedly, the Duke suddenly passed away. Her husband's expression was unreadable, neither grief nor joy. It made her heart ache. This marriage was, after all, a contract. Although she had genuinely served as the territory's mistress for 8 years, for her husband's happiness, she had to leave. Besides, her husband had now regained control of the territory and could handle all matters, big and small. It was time to leave. Alyssa thought, Liehart, I have something to tell you. But seeing his face, she couldn't bring herself to say it. Hesitating and stammering for a long while, she finally resolved to speak. Typically, when nothing unexpected should happen, something unexpected happens. Panicked reports arrived. A large number of monsters had been spotted in the western forest, and they were wreaking havoc. Upon hearing this, Lionheart immediately prepared to deal with the situation. Alyssa also found it strange. Monsters, which shouldn't appear in winter, had been appearing frequently and harming residents. Perhaps it wasn't because spring was approaching. Could someone be deliberately orchestrating this? Just as she was thinking this, a young aide reported an avalanche in a mountain village. Although there were reportedly no casualties when she arrived at the scene, she was still shocked. The entire village was buried under snow. In minus 50-degree weather, how could the villagers survive? She quickly dismounted to offer comfort. No one was injured or buried, but a little girl kept crying. Her brother had gone up the mountain to check things out and hadn't returned. Hearing it was the western forest, Alyssa's heart sank. Wasn't that where the monsters were appearing? Feigning composure, she praised the little girl's bravery and reassured her that everything would be all right. But a search had to be launched immediately. She was uncertain. All she could do was pray the boy would be safe. But her fears were realized. A pack of one-horned wolves, drooling, surrounded the boy hiding in the bushes. He was terrified. Would he ever make it back? A young couple, married for 7 years, before they could even start a family, fell off a 10,000-foot cliff. In minus 50-degree weather, first an avalanche buried the village. Then someone's actions led to the appearance of monsters. To help the villagers survive, Alyssa urgently prepared relief supplies. The immediate problem was quickly resolved, but the missing boy was still nowhere to be found. Only a single shoe was found deep in the forest. As it grew darker, ignoring the knight's advice, she decided to join the search party. But halfway there, she encountered something even stranger. These human-faced, thin monsters were naturally afraid of humans. Now, they were also emerging from the mountains. She frowned. Something was definitely wrong. Something was influencing them. They searched from day into night, but they couldn't find a trace of the boy. Now, heavy snow began to fall again. Just as everyone was urging him to leave, a child's scream suddenly pierced the air. "Hurry!" The little boy over here was terrified, but thankfully unharmed. He had just barely calmed down when he suddenly cried out, his face filled with terror. The monster had reappeared, staring at Alyssa, its entire body blood red. She trembled and turned, but it was too late to escape. Am I going to die here? Facing the beast lunging at her, she instinctively reached out, unwilling to die. Unexpectedly, the moment her fingers touched the monster, little blue sparks erupted. The beast that had been about to devour her transformed in the blink of an eye into a docile puppy. What's going on? Although confused, she was temporarily out of danger. However, the situation was still dire. They were trapped on a cliff edge, surrounded by a pack of monsters. What do we do? Alyssa was completely at a loss. Just then, the familiar wind blew again. Lionheart appeared in midair like a god, telling everyone to step back. These mere monsters dare to try and harm his wife? They were courting death. Rumble. Bolts of lightning crashed down, making the monsters' fur stand on end. Their bodies sizzled. If only there were some cumin, they'd be even more delicious. Within seconds, the monsters were dealt with. Alyssa was both moved and overjoyed, but the lightning was too powerful. Cracks began to appear beneath her feet. In the blink of an eye, the stone completely gave way, and she plummeted. "Alyssa!" Lionheart cried, diving down and reaching out. Thankfully, he succeeded, catching his wife in his arms. But the speed was too great. Even he, with all his power, couldn't change their trajectory. He could only use the wind to slow their impact. Splash! When the knights looked over the edge, all they saw were the turbulent waters. There was no sign of the Duke and his wife. The couple, married for 700 days, finally had a truly intimate moment. The unfortunate pair, having fallen into love, were now caught in a whirlpool. Lionheart held tightly to the unconscious Alyssa. Even with his ability to fly, escape was difficult. He was running out of air. Fortunately, the current suddenly shifted, and he was able to breathe the fresh air again. But Alyssa was barely clinging to life. No matter how much he called her name, she didn't respond. He leaned in close, performing CPR and desperately compressing her chest. Although he managed to revive her, her body temperature continued to drop. Without a place to warm up, her condition would only worsen. The snow continued to fall, and everything around them was white. "I hope there's a village." The scene changed. A fire crackled in a fireplace. Alyssa felt warm and comfortable, slowly opening her eyes. She wasn't quite sure where she was. The place was dilapidated, but why was there a bare chest right in front of her? And it was right in front of her face. Hearing her husband's concerned voice, coupled with his familiar face, she flushed crimson, cold sweat dripping down her face. Why was this happening? After listening to her husband's explanation, she remembered falling off the cliff. But the chest before her was so distracting, she didn't know where to look. Then her husband said, "Even if you don't like it, there's nothing we can do. Your body temperature is still too low." "No, I don't dislike it," she blurted out without thinking. "I like it very much." She had actually meant to say she appreciated his concern and kindness, but her poor phrasing made the atmosphere awkward. She wished the earth would swallow her whole. Sitting up, she made the excuse of wanting water. It didn't matter if there was any. She just wanted to escape the awkwardness. Seeing her thirst, and with no water nearby, Liehart offered her some wine. He warned her that it was quite strong, knowing his wife had a low tolerance for alcohol, but he handed it to her anyway. As they say, alcohol emboldens the shy. Alyssa didn't care how strong the alcohol was. She gulped down several large mouthfuls like water. Finally, she felt at ease. The fire in the fireplace burned brighter and brighter, and the two drew closer and closer. Words of gratitude suddenly tumbled out. Alyssa called out to Liehart, "Thank you for coming back alive, and thank you for not becoming ugly." Her husband told her to rest well. She unexpectedly replied, "I don't want us holding each other so tightly. Don't you mind? What do you think? Do I look like I mind?" Her husband's answer made her blush down to her heels. She quickly got up to go to bed, but the alcohol went to her head. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she was caught in an embrace. Netizens watching this scene exclaimed it was unbearable. The atmosphere was getting intense. The eyes of both of them burned like fire. At this moment, our young Duke was finally about to consummate the marriage, their first wedding night in 7 years. Alyssa woke up and didn't acknowledge what happened. "I'm sorry," she said. "I drank too much yesterday." She promised that this kind of mistake wouldn't happen again. Liehart's head was buzzing, but seeing Alyssa's cautious look, he couldn't bring himself to be angry. He reached out, wanting to say something, but was interrupted by a knight who had come looking for him. Alyssa had just gotten up when she suddenly felt dizzy. She fainted into her husband's arms, her temperature instantly spiking to 122 degrees Fahrenheit. This made Liehart extremely worried. Sitting by her bedside, he kept apologizing. He recalled how they had fallen in love. They had been swept away by a raging current. He held the unconscious Alyssa and almost didn't make it out. Fortunately, the current suddenly changed direction. They both surfaced. Alyssa had swallowed too much water. Not only was her face pale, but her body temperature kept dropping. Although he managed to get the water out of her system through chest compressions, they couldn't survive in minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit weather without a fire. Luckily, he found an abandoned house. Waves of warmth washed over them. Alyssa finally opened her eyes. This was the first time she had been so exposed in front of her husband. She didn't know where to look. Hearing her husband ask her to endure it even if she didn't like it, she replied, "No, I like it." She liked her husband's kindness. She liked his gentleness. But because she didn't express herself clearly, the atmosphere became a little awkward. She excused herself to get a drink of water. Even though her husband told her there wasn't any, she insisted on going just to avoid the awkwardness. Unexpectedly, her husband had brought liquor with him. Remembering how she got drunk and acted out, he repeatedly told her to drink less. After all, the alcohol was quite strong. She didn't care and took several large gulps. The fire in the fireplace burned brighter and brighter, but the two didn't know what to say. After 7 years apart, they hadn't had a proper conversation. Alyssa called out to Liehart, "Thank you for growing up well, and thank you for coming back alive." The alcohol started to affect her. She was actually afraid of such close contact. She was worried it would upset her husband. After all, the original Alyssa's downfall was her desire for her husband's affection. "Don't you mind?" she asked. "Do I look like I mind?" Her husband's reply made her blush to her heels. She got up, wanting to go to bed quickly, but she was so dizzy that she almost fell. You definitely won't like what happens next. What followed was the scene from the beginning. Perhaps out of fear, Alyssa met the original Alyssa in a dream. "Didn't you say you would only love one person? So you're the same as me. You clearly like him in your heart, but you lie to yourself and say it was an accident. Her neck was grabbed in a chokehold. The words, "You can't escape the plot. You'll meet a tragic end," filled her with terror. Every word was terrifying. Let him not wake up from this dream. Lionheart blamed himself terribly. He blamed his impatience and his inability to overcome his desires. Thompson had returned. He'd found a reason for the frequent monster appearances. Purple crystals were discovered in the monster's stomachs. Lionheart's expression changed drastically. So that's how it was. A thumb-sized stone could pollute an entire area. It could even turn people into zombies. Lionheart had a bad feeling. After all, these stones only existed in the canyon, and the canyon had long been covered by a barrier. So this was a man-made disaster, not a natural one. To find out the truth, he decided to go to the canyon. As he expected, the barrier guardians within the canyon had emerged. Because of the stone's pollution, their spirits had been absorbed, turning them into walking corpses. The only way to end their suffering was a shot through the heart. After laying the soldiers' remains to rest, he led everyone deeper inside to investigate. The further in he went, the more suffocating it felt. Suddenly, he smelled a clear, fresh scent. It was the purifying lake containing purifying power. Although it could suppress evil energy, he still couldn't let his guard down. Something could jump out at any moment. Lionheart had just finished paying his respects to the soldiers when danger arrived. It was a monster in human form. It walked out of the darkness and seemed to understand human speech. But upon hearing the warning to let it rest, it walked even faster. Lionheart was sent flying 10 meters by a single blow from the monster. As his sword pierced the monster's side, the monster actually spoke that I've waited so long for this day. My wish seems to have been granted. But these words sent chills down Lionheart's spine. The monster felt strangely familiar. Lost in thought, he didn't notice the black mist drifting onto him. The result was a sharp pain that shot through his entire body. Meanwhile, Alyssa's fever finally broke. She learned from her maid, Annie, that the monster appearances of the past 2 days were due to a demonic presence. Her husband had gone out to investigate. Her intuition told her the Emperor was behind all of this. To suppress Lubring, he had extended his evil hand towards the common people. It was utterly despicable. Despite Annie's comfort, she was still worried about her husband. She hadn't seen him for days since returning, especially after dreaming of the original Alyssa. She felt even more uneasy, afraid that her husband would be cold towards her. After all, something her husband disliked in the original story had happened. What if he started to hate her? She couldn't bear to imagine such an outcome. Just then a maid came running in frantically, shouting, "Madam, it's terrible. His Grace the Duke has collapsed." Xiao, the Duke, who feared nothing, not even death, was brought to tears by his wife. What they thought was a beautiful moment turned out to be just a misunderstanding between husband and wife. He told her to pretend nothing happened, not to take it to heart. Look how childish she was being. But upon learning of his collapse, Alyssa's urgency was evident. Dragging her feverish body, she ran at breakneck speed to see her husband, anxious to know if he was all right. Yet, her husband merely glanced at her and walked right past. He said he didn't have time right now. She felt both disappointed and confused. What was going on? Her husband seemed to be avoiding her. Was it because of that incident? It seemed her husband truly hated intimacy. Annie, sensing her unease, said, "Don't worry, madam. Duke Xiao is as strong as an ox. He'll be fine." Annie's sweetness lifted her spirits considerably. Rather than fretting alone, she decided to talk to her husband face to face. Cheerfully, she instructed Annie to prepare a few extra dishes for dinner. She was going to the dining hall to eat. Unexpectedly, the housekeeper informed her that her husband wouldn't be coming and had decided not to come at all recently, saying he was afraid of spreading the evil energy. Looking at the empty seat, although she felt a little sad, she didn't plan to make a fuss. When midnight arrived and she still hadn't seen her husband, she went directly to his office. Out of generosity, she told her husband he didn't need to take responsibility for that night's incident, only asking him not to be angry. Her happiness somehow made her husband even angrier. He snapped, "I won't walk past him again." He opened the door. "Go back and tell Alyssa not to come again for a while." Alyssa said she understood, but tears welled up in her eyes. He left resolutely. This time, the good night made Lionheart's heart ache. Earlier that day in the canyon, he had not only been attacked by flying creatures, but also choked by black smoke, even losing consciousness. Someone as strong as himself couldn't bear it, let alone his sick wife. To avoid embracing his wife, he didn't even dare to speak much. and while killing monsters, the phrase, "my heart's desire," kept unsettling him. He never thought things would turn out like this with his wife. He covered his face in distress. When would his precious wife understand him? Alyssa had a high fever of 90 degrees. Hearing her husband wanted to call a doctor, she felt even worse. Since their falling out in the study, the couple hadn't seen each other for over half a month. It wasn't until they departed for the capital to investigate the truth behind the monsters that Alyssa saw her husband from a distance. They each had a separate carriage, which made her unhappy. Listening to the housekeeper and servants talk, she felt that the phrase, "I'm afraid there won't be a chance to return," was true. It was the marriage contract that had kept her here for so long. It was time to propose a divorce. But Alyssa, who never got carsick, was unexpectedly feeling very ill this time. For 15 days, the constant travel had taken its toll on her. She not only experienced dizziness, but also felt weak and had a persistent low-grade fever. Although they were not far from the capital, Liehart ordered them to set up camp. He was extremely worried. The black energy that had afflicted him had just dissipated, and he immediately rushed to Alyssa's side. Seeing his wife's discomfort, his heart ached. "You should have told me to stop and rest earlier." But his wife didn't want to be a burden on everyone. As they were talking, Annie brought over a bowl of revitalizing soup. "Eating this will definitely restore your energy." Looking at the tempting food, Alyssa felt nauseous and wanted to push it away. She ran outside frantically, overcome by nausea. Seeing her husband about to call a doctor, she flatly refused, saying she was just carsick. But she had a bad feeling, and her period hadn't come this month. Could she be pregnant? The thought brought her no joy. She couldn't forget her husband's childhood vow to end their family line, and his aversion to sons expressed in his sleep. An aversion so strong he'd even kill his own son. She couldn't let that happen. In the blink of an eye, they arrived at the Duke's mansion in the capital. Her husband immediately wanted to call a doctor. No matter how she said she was fine, her husband insisted on staying by her side. Seeing the doctor, her mind went blank. She didn't know what to do. Whether it was fortunate or unfortunate, Liehart was called away by his subordinates. As soon as he left, Alyssa felt better. She didn't refuse the doctor's examination. Although she wasn't certain if she was pregnant, she now wanted Annie to do something for her. She had a child. Fear accompanied the doctor's diagnosis. Alyssa emerged from the doctor's house, her face etched with despair. Mistress and maid remained silent for a long while, let alone pregnancy. Annie didn't even know when Alyssa and the Duke had consummated their marriage. Could it have been the day she fell off the cliff? Yes, it just happened. Isn't it ridiculous? He was preparing for a divorce, and then this happened. Annie held Alyssa's hand sympathetically. "It's my fault for not taking better care. It's my fault for being so careless." Watching Annie grow increasingly distraught, Alyssa forced a smile, trying to comfort the silly girl. But what should she do now? "He told me since we have a child, it's better to stay together." Listening to Annie's words, Alyssa felt disheartened, because Liehart not only didn't want children, but he particularly loathed them. And yet, the Duke had slept with her without any protection. "He spent the night with you. What a scumbag. And I thought he was a good man." Annie grew angrier with each thought. In the end, she was filled with self-reproach. Patting her chest lightly, she declared, "I will protect the child in your womb. Just please don't bear this burden alone." Alyssa was touched by Annie's words. "Thank you, Annie." Having Annie around truly brought a sense of security. However, even with that said, she had read the original novel. The child she was carrying was none other than the novel's North Penn Haynes, a child deprived of love. Liehart's aversion to him had begun even while he was still in the womb. Growing up in a world devoid of love, his heart gradually became twisted. He even kidnapped and imprisoned the female lead, much like a pitiful soul yearning for love. Alyssa silently vowed to prevent this tragedy from repeating itself. Therefore, leaving was the best option. She had once considered staying and working alongside her husband for the development of their territory. But during the days following the old Duke's death, she overheard the head butler. He had intended to persuade Liehart to embrace family life, assuming the lack of children was due to dissatisfaction with the arranged marriage. The butler wasn't entirely wrong. However, Liehart's resentment was directed towards the old Duke himself, a resentment so deep that he wanted to end the family line. Alyssa still vividly remembered that face contorted with disgust. If 3 were destined to fail, then 2 would suffice. Stroking her belly, she finally felt a flicker of maternal joy. To prepare for the child's arrival, she began reading various parenting books. Since Penhanes would also inherit the family's power, she needed to learn how to manage those abilities. She remembered how Lionheart, as a child, had suffered numerous injuries before mastering his own powers due to a lack of guidance. So, even if she didn't know, she would ask. Just then, the butler delivered a letter. It was from Ansel, informing her that the villa was completed. He had even included photographs of the finished villa. Alyssa felt a surge of excitement and anticipation. It was time to prepare for her departure. Suddenly, without her noticing, Lionheart entered the room. He looked at the letter in her hand. What's this? The first time, she faced her husband without wearing lingerie. She resolutely asked for a divorce. Receiving news of her friend's completed villa filled Alyssa with joy. However, her husband's sudden appearance startled her. What's that? He asked. She quickly changed the subject. I asked there's something you need. Lionheart had finished work early and wanted to have dinner with her. This was completely unexpected. If she agreed, her plans would be exposed. If she refused, Lionheart would undoubtedly call the doctor. After much deliberation, she suggested he freshen up first, hoping to feign sleep and escape the situation. Her husband was successfully persuaded and left to bathe, but she truly needed to speak with him soon. The following midnight, she intercepted her husband at his door. He complained about the late hour, suggesting they talk tomorrow. But this matter was urgent. Clasping Lionheart's hands tightly, she declared, let's get a divorce. What? Lionheart thought he had misheard. His seemingly perfect wife wanted a divorce? Yes, it was our agreement 8 years ago, and we agreed that after 8 years, I would leave the Duke's house. Is it because of that guy? Yesterday's letter. How could Lionheart not know who it is? He's pushing me. It's because Ansel suddenly mentioned another man. My husband was angry, but that man is just a friend. The divorce is purely to fulfill our agreement. What agreement? I don't remember. Lionheart feigned amnesia. He was angry at himself for being too careless. Ever since the day they made the agreement 8 years ago, Alyssa didn't say anything. She even stayed by his side all this time. Looking happy, he thought she had forgotten the agreement. He hadn't expected this, but he won't divorce her. Cupping Alyssa's face in his hands, he said, "You are my wife, the mistress of Lou Bolin. This fact will never change in this lifetime." His possessiveness became distorted, frightening Alyssa. He noticed this and, releasing his hands, said, "Sweet dreams." Then he sent Alyssa out the door. Alyssa's father, go to hell. Why is my husband angry? She really doesn't understand. She just made a choice that would make everyone happy. Why is he angry? Why is he taking it out on her? The more she thought about it, the sadder she became. The scene changes. Lionheart met with the Emperor. Seeing the Emperor's false politeness, he directly beckoned his subordinates to serve the food. This is the demonic soul, Shur Xiagu, discovered within the territory. All my soldiers were annihilated. It's truly detestable. Have you found the culprit? The Emperor grumbled, showing no sign of self-control. Truly cunning. Lionheart was already in a bad mood. Now the Emperor's pretense made him both angry and disgusted. In that case, I've already uncovered the general truth. Because Lou Bolin not only poses a threat, but also lacks strength. Despicable people always do shameless things. Let those behind this tremble with envy. Lionheart spoke in veiled terms. In any case, I won't let that person get away with this. He maintained a respectful demeanor, but his words were extremely aggressive. Having finished speaking, he turned and left Shalsa Ly. The Emperor fumed. What does it have to do with him? Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his back. His shoulder seemed to malfunction. What's going on? Such a lively child, but her husband is useless. Ever since their divorce talks fell apart, Alyssa has had a headache. But it was her husband's firm refusal to divorce that made her realize the difference between reality and the original story. And this difference indicated a change in their relationship. Since he could like her, perhaps he could also love the child in her womb. Nothing is absolute. She shouldn't always fear the ending of the original story. With this in mind, she decided to talk to her husband again. Unexpectedly, she bumped into him before she even stepped out the door. Lionheart, why are you here? Her husband seemed a little embarrassed. He wanted to have lunch with her. But I just had breakfast. Liehart suddenly blushed. Then let's go to the countryside for some fresh air. Liehart was afraid Alyssa would be bored at home. He's so shy. He reminds me of when we were dating. This suggestion appealed to Alyssa. She happily agreed to go out with her husband. This time, she must succeed. Although she wasn't feeling well, after Annie dressed her, she looked as beautiful as a flower. The moment she turned around, Liehart was captivated again. The moment their eyes met, they were both speechless with emotion. He took Alyssa's hand, and they boarded the carriage heading for the countryside. But Alyssa didn't understand his feelings. Looking at her silent husband, she thought it was because of last night's argument. The reason he refused her divorce proposal must be because he saw her as family and a friend. She began to have a glimmer of hope. Maybe they didn't have to divorce. Maybe the three of them could live happily together. Lost in thought, she succumbed to the exhaustion of early pregnancy and drifted off to sleep. Liehart gently held her in his arms. He didn't understand why Alyssa always wanted to leave him. After 7 years of separation, they had finally reunited. Alyssa brought up the promise they made 8 years ago. Holding her wife's hand, she was filled with memories. Now they were inseparable. How wonderful it would be to stay together like this forever. The cherry blossom forest outside the city was as beautiful as a fairy tale. The image of a happy family of 4 under the trees filled Alyssa with envy. Children are really cute, aren't they? Right? I don't really think so. Do you want children of your own? Liehart asked indirectly, wanting to know if her wife had changed her mind. Liehart, somewhat experienced, assumed it was Alyssa who wanted children. Although she hadn't wanted children because of her grandfather, she didn't dislike them. But she had heard that pregnancy and childbirth could be very painful for women, and Alyssa's health had been very poor recently. She couldn't be so selfish. It wouldn't be too late to have children after Alyssa's health improved, so she could only lie and say she didn't want any. But just as she was about to explain, Thompson interrupted with his children. The kids were so rambunctious. Alyssa, who had just been feeling down, hearing the children's happy laughter, was now smiling radiantly. But she was sure her wife truly didn't want children. It was all just her wishful thinking. It seemed that to avoid everyone's unhappiness, she really had no choice but to leave. Her young wife was pregnant, but she thought she had a terminal illness. The usually stoic woman was now crying like a child. It was truly unfair. Alyssa's resolve to leave wavered again. When she confirmed that her wife truly didn't want children, she was truly heartbroken. But her wife had suffered what she considered mental abuse from her grandfather since childhood, so her reluctance to have children was understandable. She shouldn't have placed her hopes on someone else. Thinking it over, she felt it was actually a good thing, because she no longer needed to worry about futile expectations. If she couldn't get a divorce smoothly, she would run away. Just as she was thinking this, Annie appeared with medicine. Taking a little before meals can alleviate morning sickness symptoms. Although it varies from person to person and may not be very effective, it's still helpful. Alyssa was grateful for Annie's thoughtfulness. Suddenly, Liehart appeared. Her serious expression was frightening. Had she discovered the truth? Alyssa's hand, clutching the medicine bottle, trembled uncontrollably. She told Annie to leave. She was ready. What illness do you have? Faced with her wife's question, she silently withdrew her hand, wanting to confess everything. Unexpectedly, her wife suddenly pulled her into a tight embrace, calling her name. Are you planning to die alone, somewhere without me? I won't let you go. Liehart's voice gradually deepened. Only then did Alyssa realize her wife had misunderstood. She hadn't expected her wife to cry so heartbrokenly. She raised her hand and wiped the tears from Liehart's eyes. Smiling, she said, "Actually, the medicine Annie gave me is for morning sickness. It's not a terminal illness, so don't worry." But Liehart still wanted to take care of her, and she had no reason to refuse. Saying, "Okay," she agreed. Thinking that her wife had a lot of work and wouldn't stay by her side for long, she didn't expect Liehart to stay for more than half a month sleeping beside her every night. Looking at Liehart's sleeping face, she was extremely worried. As her pregnancy symptoms gradually disappeared and her belly grew bigger day by day, She knew she would be found out sooner or later. She caressed Leihart's face, hoping her choice would be understood. This silent embrace would be their final farewell. Early the next morning, Leihart finally put on her work clothes. Before leaving, she gave countless instructions. If you feel unwell, be sure to call the doctor. Even if you don't have an appetite, you must eat on time. She fussed like a mother hen. Alyssa couldn't help but smile. Seeing her wife about to leave, she got out of bed to see her off. Although they were talking and laughing, when she heard Leihart say, "I'm leaving," she felt reluctant again. Hugging Leihart tightly, she felt the warmth from her chest. Leihart didn't notice anything amiss, but don't worry. Instead of just being confined, she bid a proper farewell, watching her husband leave. Alyssa, her nose red with happiness, turned to Annie and told them to prepare for their immediate departure. The pregnant protagonist finally made her escape, traversing a dark and narrow secret passage. She saw the door to freedom. With a creak, the blinding sunlight poured in. Alyssa's haggard appearance worried Annie. She suggested they rest before continuing, a sensible proposal. However, the Duke's household would discover their absence by morning at the latest. They had to leave quickly. Looking back at the castle, Alyssa felt a pang of regret. She hoped Leihart would take care of himself. The mistress and maid soon arrived at a merchant caravan. She retrieved a coded package. She had left everything she needed there. The head of the caravan personally greeted them and arranged a delicious breakfast. The necessary supplies and funds were already loaded onto the carriage. He had even thoughtfully arranged for escorting mercenaries. The leader's efficiency was undeniable. A prime steak, bread, and salad were set before them. Alyssa had no appetite. Forcing herself to eat a little to regain her strength, she felt a sudden sharp pain in her abdomen. To Annie's concern, she simply said she wasn't hungry. But unable to bear it any longer, she stood to leave. Her vision suddenly went black. Fortunately, Annie was quick to react. Catching her mistress, Annie discovered Alyssa had a high fever and her breathing was weakening. Annie was frantic, wanting to wait until Alyssa recovered before leaving. But having finally escaped, Alyssa just wanted to get away. Unsure what to do, the caravan leader offered a solution. Meanwhile, Leihart was busy pursuing the mastermind behind the magic stone incident. He landed with a flourish. "Where are you going so early?" Zimao, sweating nervously, greeted him respectfully while making furtive gestures behind his back. Unfortunately for him, his hidden dagger was swatted away. Leihart landed a punch, sending Zimao sprawling to the ground with a sickening crack. Zimao, tears streaming down his face, begged Leihart for mercy. "Then tell me about the red stone." Just as the truth was about to be revealed, danger struck. Fortunately, he easily deflected the simple attack, but its very simplicity alerted him to something amiss. Turning, he saw two black-clad figures lunging at Zimao with daggers. Leihart tried to intervene, but a sharp pain in his shoulder flared up. Fighting through the pain, he raised his hand, and a surge of dark energy erupted from his palm. The three attackers fell simultaneously. Even he was startled. Looking at the bodies on the ground, he wondered, did I kill them? Before he could process what had happened, a subordinate rushed in, shouting, "Terrible news! The Duchess is gone." The Duchess, on her first attempt at running away while pregnant, suddenly spiked a fever of 105 degrees. Fortunately, the kind caravan leader took her to his villa and arranged for a female doctor to care for her. Finally, after 3 days, Alyssa revived, feeling weak but alive. Annie breathed a sigh of relief and excitedly offered to bring her food. But Alyssa wanted another checkup. Thankfully, the baby was fine, and she could resume her journey soon. She was grateful for everyone's help. If she had insisted on leaving earlier, the consequences could have been dire. Annie then appeared, looking worried. A noblewoman had arrived with an urgent matter. But Alyssa didn't recognize the red-haired woman. "I hear you have urgent business with me. Did you bring a doctor with you?" Seeing the woman's flustered expression, Alyssa realized the visit was likely an imposition. Receiving an affirmative answer, the woman tightly grasped her hand. "Please, help me." The woman's daughter had been running a fever since the previous night. Because a contagious disease was spreading in the neighboring villages, the only doctor had gone to the next village over. She had come here out of desperation. Alyssa was shocked by their daring decision. Bringing a child to where a contagious disease was rampant was surely dangerous. Having heard that a noble had arrived in the area, they decided to take a chance. Although nobles typically came to such places for recuperation, there was no guarantee of success. Alyssa, soon to be a mother herself, deeply empathized with the woman's anxiety. Without a second thought, she agreed to help. Night quickly fell. The little girl's temperature finally stabilized. The woman was deeply grateful and wanted to know her benefactor's name. Alyssa, currently on the run, panicked. She hadn't expected the woman to ask about her husband. Turning her head with embarrassment, she lied and claimed to be divorced. Figuring she would never see the woman again, she thought it wouldn't matter. To her surprise, the woman before her was the emperor's half-sister, now married to a marquis. "I'm so sorry," Alyssa stammered. "I haven't been in the imperial capital long, so I didn't recognize you, princess." The princess, however, was unpretentious. Upon hearing that Alyssa was pregnant and divorced, the princess felt both guilty and sympathetic. She immediately took off her necklace and placed it in Alyssa's hand. Alyssa's situation reminded the princess of a dear friend who had also come to this place pregnant and alone. The princess hadn't taken proper care of her friend, leading to a lifelong regret. "If you encounter any difficulties, please come find me." Alyssa was deeply touched by this unexpected intimacy on their first meeting. "Thank you so much, madam." Meanwhile, back at the temple, the Pope was worshipping the gods. The Celt family had raised popes for generations. Only the most powerful victor could lead the temple. Now, only Aiden remained of their lineage. Unexpectedly, during the new worship ceremony, he sensed the Duke was in danger. He abruptly opened his eyes and called to a nearby priest, "Can you summon the Knight Commander?" His wife had run away, and he was frantically searching for her. Seeing his murderous look, if he hadn't found his wife's horse and learned she had gone to a merchant caravan, someone might have already lost their life. Just as he was about to reach the caravan, Lionheart was suddenly called away by his subordinates. Right or wrong, when you see the Duchess, agree with her first. After all, the Duchess is always right. Lionheart was in no mood to listen to this. He had only gone to work, and when he returned, there was only a letter. Alyssa wished him a happy life. He felt terrible. Without Alyssa, how could he be happy? Furious, he arrived at the merchant caravan. "I need to see the person in charge immediately." The attendant was terrified, but the caravan leader had his own calculations. He refused to divulge any guest information. When asked about a blonde, blue-eyed woman, even if he knew who it was, he simply feigned ignorance. However, he agreed to a search request. If he hadn't, the place would likely have been torn apart. The knights searched everywhere, but found no trace of Alyssa. Lionheart was getting a headache. Another knight suddenly delivered a letter bearing Alyssa's name. The handwriting wasn't Alyssa's, but after reading the contents, he immediately gathered his men and set off. Meanwhile, Alyssa was already on a carriage heading towards the capital. The princess had been so kind to her. She suddenly wondered if her own mother, if she were still alive, would have shown her the same concern. She had been worried about the long carriage journey and whether her body could endure it. Fortunately, with the branch leader's help, they were taking a shorter route by water. But Annie couldn't be happy. She thought she could protect Alyssa until the day she saw her collapse with a fever. He only then realized how clingy he had been. Besides crying and worrying, he couldn't do anything. If it happened again, he really didn't know what to do. He secretly wrote a letter to the Duke, but he saw Alyssa board the ship, and still, the Duke hadn't come looking for her. Lionheart was incredibly anxious. After several days of restless travel, Alyssa fell asleep as soon as she boarded the ship. What happened next was completely unexpected. She woke up in the middle of the night, burdened with worries, and stepped out of her room. Looking at the starry night sky and feeling the sea breeze, she couldn't appreciate any of it. Would she ever be able to return to the Duke's mansion? Even just once would be enough. They had only been together for less than a year. But why were her memories of Lionheart the most vivid? Looking at the brooch she had taken, it was perhaps the only thing she had to remember him by. A wave of sadness washed over her. Suddenly, a gust of wind howled past. Startled, she looked up. A familiar figure, like a god, appeared in the air, riding the wind. It was Lionheart. Alyssa, pregnant, had been traveling. She suddenly developed a fever of 105 degrees. Fortunately, the leader of the merchant group was a kind man. He not only brought her into his own small villa, but also found a female doctor to care for her personally. Finally, 3 days later, Alyssa regained her vitality. She felt lightheaded. Annie breathed a sigh of relief and excitedly offered to bring Alyssa something to eat. But Alyssa wanted another checkup. Fortunately, the baby was stable, and she would be able to give birth in a few days. She was very grateful for everyone's help. If she had insisted on leaving, there might have been serious consequences. Just then, Annie appeared with a worried expression, saying a noble woman urgently needed to see someone. But Alyssa didn't recognize this red-haired woman. "I heard you urgently needed to see me. Did you bring a doctor with you?" Seeing the woman's bewildered look, Alyssa realized her request was abrupt. Upon receiving confirmation, the woman tightly grasped Alyssa's hand. "Please help me." The woman explained that her daughter had been running a fever since last night. Because of a contagious disease outbreak in the nearby villages, the only doctor had gone to the neighboring village. She had come here out of desperation. Alyssa was shocked by their daring decision. Taking the child to a place with a contagious disease was incredibly dangerous. "We only heard that a noble had come here," the woman explained, "and thought we'd try." Although nobles usually came to such places to recuperate, there was no guarantee of success. Alyssa, soon to be a mother herself, deeply understood the woman's anxiety. Without hesitation, she agreed to help. Night quickly fell. The little girl's temperature finally stabilized. The woman was very grateful and wanted to know her benefactor's name. Alyssa gave a false one. She felt both guilty and heartbroken. She immediately took off her necklace and placed it in Alyssa's hand. Alyssa reminded the princess of a dear friend who had also come to this place alone and pregnant. The princess hadn't been able to care for her properly, leading to a lifelong regret. "If you encounter any trouble, please come find me." Alyssa was deeply touched by this instant intimacy. "Thank you so much, madam." Meanwhile, in the temple, the Pope was worshipping the gods. The Celt family had raised popes for generations. Only the strongest and most victorious could lead the temple. Now, only Aiden remained of their lineage. Unexpectedly, during the new worship ceremony, he sensed that the Duke was in danger. He abruptly opened his eyes and called to a nearby priest. "Can you summon the Knight Commander?" Alyssa ran away. He found her as quickly as possible. Seeing Alyssa shrink back in fear, he pulled her into an embrace. He stared at her stunned face. "Where did you think you were going with my child?" He bared his teeth in a warning snarl. "Now that you're carrying my child, you're not going anywhere, no matter where you run to." His sharp tone softened. He fought back his anger. Remembering his subordinate's advice, Liehart's nose suddenly turned red. "That I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. Let's go inside and talk. Annie is worried sick. She's been wondering where you went in the middle of the night." Seeing the couple enter together, perhaps wanting to give them time to talk privately, Liehart said he would step out and return shortly. Aunt Eliza nodded. Alyssa wondered how her husband had found her. Unexpectedly, Annie suddenly knelt down. She explained that when Liehart was sick and fainted, he kept calling Alyssa's name. Scared and unsure what to do, Annie had secretly written to the Duke. Annie's face was streaked with tears. She felt terribly sorry for Alyssa. Alyssa wasn't angry, but she told Annie there couldn't be a next time. Strangely, despite her plan's failure, she felt relieved. Although she was startled to see Liehart, she felt more longing and joy. Remembering that she had run away because she was afraid her husband would harm the baby, she felt like a fool. The truth was finally revealed. Liehart opened the door and entered again. He wanted to talk with Alyssa. After Annie left, he finally voiced his confusion. "Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant?" "Because you didn't want the baby." Hearing this answer, he froze. Alyssa said she overheard his conversation with the old butler. He wanted to run away and be a mama's boy. He remembered the day Alyssa suddenly brought up the topic of children. He finally understood. She had already hinted at it many times. He held Alyssa tightly, repeatedly apologizing. "It's all my fault. I should have paid more attention to you. What I said to the old butler. I didn't mean I didn't want children. So please don't run away again." The misunderstanding was finally cleared. Alyssa's pent-up grievances poured out. Tears streamed down her face. Perhaps many things had changed. Their child wouldn't be like the one she lost. She and Liehart could live happily ever after. Listening to her husband's apologies, she finally burst into tears. The moon descended from the sky. The merchant ship changed course and docked. This was all thanks to the Duke. He had offered double compensation to stop the ship. His subordinates had already prepared carriage. Upon seeing Alyssa, they immediately expressed their feelings. The Duke is still unfamiliar with the territory's affairs. "We can't do without you, madam. You've worried everyone." Alyssa felt embarrassed. Thankfully, everything was still in time. Liehart took her hand. Let's go home. Alyssa had run away. He frantically searched everywhere for her. Seeing his furious expression, if he hadn't found Alyssa's horse, things could have turned ugly. Alyssa had gone to a merchant guild branch. Someone might have already lost their life. Just as he was about to reach the guild, Liehart was suddenly called away by his subordinates. Right or wrong, apologize to Madam first when you see her. After all, Madam is always right. He was in no mood to listen. He had just gone out to work, and when he returned, there was only a letter. Alyssa hoped he would live a happy life. He felt terrible. How could he be happy without Alyssa? He stormed into the merchant guild that I demand to see the guild master immediately. The clerk was flustered, but the guild master had his own rules. He refused to divulge customer information. When asked about a blonde, blue-eyed woman, even if he knew who it was, he could only cough and sputter. He still agreed to the search request. If he hadn't, he probably wouldn't have to face him. The knights searched everywhere, but couldn't find the Duchess. Liehart was getting a headache. Another knight suddenly delivered a letter. It was addressed to the Duchess. The handwriting wasn't Alyssa's, but seeing what the letter said, he immediately called for his men to pursue her. Meanwhile, Alyssa was already on a carriage headed for the docks. The princess had been so concerned about her as she left. She suddenly wondered if her own mother, if she were still alive, would have cared for her like that. She had been worried about the long carriage ride and whether her body could endure it. Fortunately, with the branch manager's help, they were able to travel by water, shortening the journey considerably. But Annie couldn't be happy. She thought she could protect the Duchess. Until the day she saw the Duchess collapse with a fever. She realized she was too naive. Besides crying and worrying, she couldn't do anything. If it happened again, she really didn't know what to do. She secretly wrote a letter to the Duke. But even as she watched the Duchess board, the Duke still hadn't come. She was incredibly anxious. After several days of travel, the young lady fell asleep as soon as they boarded the ship. This was completely unexpected by Alyssa. She woke up in the middle of the night, burdened with worries, and stepped out of her room. Looking at the starry night sky, feeling the gentle sea breeze, she couldn't appreciate any of it. Would she ever be able to return to the Duke's mansion? Even just once. They had only been together for less than a year. Why were her memories of Liehart the most vivid? Looking at the ribbon she had taken, it was perhaps the only thing she had to remember him by. A wave of sadness washed over her. Suddenly, a gust of wind howled past. Startled, she looked up. She saw a familiar figure, appearing like a god descending from the heavens. It was Liehart. His wife was pregnant, but he was the one suffering from morning sickness. The night they returned home together, everyone at the Duke's mansion was overjoyed. They had prepared a lavish dinner, but Alyssa didn't have much of an appetite. Although she had taken medicine to alleviate the morning sickness, she still couldn't suppress the nausea. She stood up and vomited until her face turned pale. It was the first time Liehart had seen her in such pain. He Tundig embraced her from behind. "That I'm so sorry. It's all my fault." She reassured him that she was fine, but she really needed to go back to her room to rest. No sooner had she left than Thompson found Liehart. "When your wife is pregnant, you must do these things. First, congratulate her. Then, tell her how happy you are. Finally, give her a bouquet of flowers. Otherwise, you won't have another chance." If you asked him how he knew, it was, of course, because he had been preparing for this moment. "Although I've waited 27 years, ha ha ha." Under his tutelage, Liehart finally understood. The room was filled with rose petals. Alyssa had just finished her bath and entered the room. She was instantly stunned. He appeared, holding a bouquet of roses. "Congratulations on becoming a mother." After his congratulations, he promised to strive to be a good father. To stay by her side, he used the excuse of being good to the baby and declared that he would sleep with her from that day forward. While she was still skeptical, he half coaxed, half forced his way into bed with her. But the next moment, he froze. She asked him if he wanted to touch her belly. He was both excited and worried about hurting the baby. How could that be? She took his hand and placed it on her belly. "Our child is right here." Although he couldn't feel anything yet, he could already sense the magic of fatherhood. Holding her, he whispered, "Welcome to the world, little one. You must be healthy." The air was filled with the scent of happiness. The morning breeze blew. Alyssa rolled over, burying her face in the soft pillow. Opening her eyes to see him like this, she still felt shy. But looking at such a handsome face every day, perhaps even prenatal education, is unnecessary. Unable to resist, she reached out and gently rubbed his face. Her husband suddenly opened his eyes. She was still stroking his face as she said, "Good morning." The back of her head was pounding. Unexpectedly, her husband suddenly became very serious. He quickly pulled the bell and called Annie over. Because Alyssa seemed to have a fever, he was about to call the doctor, but saw Alyssa shake her head in refusal. When he heard that a low-grade fever is common in early pregnancy, Liehart was completely shocked. He hung his head, feeling terribly guilty. It seemed he needed to go to the library to brush up on his knowledge. Seeing Alyssa about to go for breakfast, he suddenly became startled and told her to wait. He thought something big was happening. Unexpectedly, it was just to say good morning to the baby. Alyssa's mood was strangely aligned with his. It felt like they had truly become a family. His heart was pounding with happiness. As the food was served, Liehart experienced something unexpected. The moment the sandwich entered his mouth, a wave of nausea washed over him. He retched repeatedly, scattering food everywhere. Liehart, what's wrong? After a sweet night with Alyssa, he vomited. The doctor smiled brightly. It turned out to be sympathetic pregnancy. It was the best expression of love for his wife. Liehart suddenly gained some knowledge, but his shoulder hurt from time to time. When does it hurt? He asked, touching his chin thoughtfully. IT hurts when my wife isn't around. The doctor was speechless. If your wife doesn't have enhanced healing abilities, then you must be talking nonsense. The doctor said he needed to go back and do more research, quickly fleeing the lovey-dovey scene. To avoid worrying Alyssa, Liehart specifically instructed his subordinates not to tell her. Even when he heard Alyssa's concern at lunch, he said he was fine. What about that Rose's fellow downstairs? It's a mustachioed man I painstakingly caught 2 days ago. But after 3 days and nights of interrogation, I haven't gotten anything out of him. I'm planning to release him. He'll definitely be killed by the mastermind then. As soon as he said this, he felt a pang of guilt. While glancing at Alyssa's expression, he quickly changed his story. Alyssa was both pleased and satisfied, but I suggest releasing Roses. Based on what I know, this man has worked for Marquis Paris for a long time, but only runs errands for profit. There's no close connection between them. In other words, as long as the connection between them is severed, that relationship can be easily broken. So let him go first. When he's facing a life or death situation, Roses isn't stupid. He'll realize he's been abandoned. Then, if we try to recruit him, he'll definitely come running. He's been under the Marquis for so long, he might have unknowingly acquired some core intelligence. If he joins the Duke's mansion, it should be helpful. Liehart, caught off guard, decided to listen to Alyssa and give it a try. Meanwhile, Aiden was investigating at the temple. He hadn't found anything suspicious related to the strange small detail he sensed last time. Could I be overthinking it? Aiden was troubled. Suddenly, a voice called out, "Long time no see, Aiden. Your Highness hasn't changed a bit." But hadn't he remained the same as well? The ring necklace on his chest was still there. Every time he looked at it, he would remember the past. They had another good friend named Yulia. The three of them had grown up together since childhood. Besides their enviable friendship, there was also the love between Aiden and Yulia. The princess witnessed their happiness, but also their misfortune. 20 years ago, the royal family began to restrict Aiden's family. The canyon also started having problems at that time. Aiden went to investigate, but was ambushed by a small flying creature and knocked unconscious. During this period, the previous emperor was also sent to his grave. The current emperor framed and executed his half-brother, brazenly ascending to the throne. Yulia was also implicated. To save her life, she had to flee, branded with the crime of treason. By the time Aiden woke up, everything had spiraled out of control. His family had been torn apart. Even when he finally found his wife, she was nothing more than a cold corpse. Because of this, the princess once hated her older brother, and she hated the empire. Yet Aiden never abandoned it. Perhaps it's because his wife's presence still lingers here. So who are you praying for today? Alyssa, facing Aiden, smiled faintly. She wanted to say it was for her family, but that wasn't true. This time, she wanted to pray for a new friend. What do you do when you have a handsome and stylish husband? Dress up beautifully, of course, and show off your love in public. Make others envious and jealous, but unable to do anything about it. Just a few days ago, an invitation to the royal hunting competition arrived at the Duke's mansion, delivered express from the Imperial Palace, 800 miles away. Considering Alyssa's pregnancy, Liehart planned to attend alone, but she refused. Alyssa was determined to go. The royal family, in their efforts to control Lubin, certainly wouldn't overlook the child she was carrying. After all, compared to capable adults, children are much easier to manipulate. She wouldn't just sit idly by. If the past 8 years have been about growth, it's time to show everyone. Lionheart couldn't argue with her. All right, I'll listen to you. Since you want to go, we must start preparing. Over the next few days, the couple visited every clothing store in the city. Although their feet ached, Alyssa was happy. With their departure for the palace scheduled for the next day, she felt sleepy but didn't want to go to bed. Seeing her husband return from work, she quickly sat up in bed, declaring her intention to make him the center of attention. In truth, she just wanted to play dress up. She took his hand, explaining her outfit ideas. As soon as she finished, Lionheart obediently took off his shirt. Alyssa blushed. Why are you undressing here? This isn't the place. Where else? This is our room. You're my wife. His words left her speechless. Trying to say something to ease her embarrassment, she noticed the scars covering his back. She couldn't help but gently touch them. Did it hurt when you got these? When Lionheart said he couldn't remember, her heart ached even more. You're going to be a father now. Please take care of yourself. Don't bear any burdens or pain alone. I want to share them with you. Lionheart's heart felt warm. Their bond deepened. The day of the hunting competition arrived quickly. Noble ladies dressed elaborately, showcasing their wealth and their husband's affection. Red-haired Lady Marianne, decked out in limited edition attire, naturally became the subject of everyone's admiration. But their attention quickly shifted. After all, that was the Lubin dukedom's carriage, and it was the Duke's first public appearance since coming of age. Marianne and her group were expecting a spectacle, assuming Alyssa and the Duke's relationship was strained. But Alyssa always arrived fashionably late. Not only did the Duke attend, but he was clearly doting on his wife. They looked happy and perfectly matched, infuriating Marianne. Meanwhile, in a distant village, Ansel was still naively waiting for Alyssa. She didn't arrive at the agreed-upon time. Instead, a middle-aged man appeared. He was the village doctor, a lifelong resident. Seeing a new neighbor, he decided to introduce himself. When Ansel mentioned the homeowner's name, the doctor, who knew the previous owner's only daughter, dropped the bread he was holding. He kept repeating, "Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Is something wrong?" Ansel asked. The doctor explained that Alyssa had died of pneumonia 8 years ago. The young couple's first public display of affection had sparked envy in many, but it also attracted unwanted attention. Seeing the princess arrive, Alyssa stammered, trying to explain. Just then, members of the royal family appeared. Everyone had to step forward and greet them. The crown prince and his sister appeared one by one. Only Ansel was nowhere to be seen. He stood them up. He had originally planned to explain in person. Fortunately, Lionheart's innate concern for Alyssa helped. His worries were temporarily forgotten. Unexpectedly, the princess, who had just walked away, interrupted the couple's sweet moment with her illness. Her words were filled with hostility towards Lionheart. It turned out that Alyssa had saved her daughter before. Having heard that Alyssa was divorced, the princess wanted her to become her daughter-in-law. Lionheart's face flushed with shame upon hearing these words. Just then, a howl rang out. The hunting competition was about to begin. Alyssa urged her husband to go and see off the reluctant princess. She immediately turned and apologized to the princess. But the princess felt it wasn't necessary. After all, it was the Duke who made the mistake and caused his wife to leave home. Alyssa defended her husband vehemently. The princess couldn't help but laugh. In her eyes, this was a display of deep love. But how could that be? Wasn't it natural to speak up for her husband? Alyssa refused to admit it was because of love. However, the misunderstanding with the princess was finally cleared up. First and foremost, they would go and enjoy the festivities together. Lionheart, on the other hand, was filled with exasperation. The crown prince had only shot a doe, yet his sycophants were praising him as a god on the battlefield. But the man being praised as a god had only been on the battlefield once in his life. Not only did he constantly hold back the entire army, but he also loved to stir up trouble among the knights. He left in disgrace before even a month had passed. Anyway, he had no talent or interest in such flattery. He just wanted to leave quickly and be by his wife's side. Forgive the crown prince's biased magic. A hero on the battlefield. How could he not even hunt a single foolish animal? Perhaps he had been on the battlefield for too long and had lost interest in weak animals. The implication being that the crown prince was incompetent. Seeing the other man's internal injuries from the mockery, Lionheart smiled with satisfaction. He turned and left Xiao Sa Ly. But halfway there, he ran into another annoying person. Wasn't this the Count, who always gave the Emperor terrible advice? His eyes couldn't hide his displeasure. No matter what the Count said, Liehart didn't want to forgive him. The Count actually claimed it was for his own good. You almost killed me several times, and you have the nerve to say it was for my own good? He turned and glared at the Count. If you spout any more nonsense, I'll tear your mouth apart. Watching his departing figure, the Count remained elegant. He smiled. The Duke will understand later. I truly was doing it for your own good. A woman, wearing only a maid's uniform, slapped the Empress and Princess in the face in public. She even attracted the envy of various talented individuals. It turned out that the hunting competition had just begun, when the Empress invited the noble ladies to afternoon tea. On the surface, it was to thank everyone for their attendance, but in reality, it was a subtle way of showing off her wealth. After all, this kind of flower tea, which blooms even in winter, was so rare that only the royal family could drink it. Others couldn't buy it. Alyssa saw right through this childish trick. The only fortunate thing was that this flower tea was safe for pregnant women. But her morning sickness hadn't subsided yet. In order to avoid revealing her pregnancy, she could only pretend to sip the tea. But it was a gathering of women. How could it be so uneventful? The Empress turned and targeted her sister-in-law first. You haven't been seen in the capital for a long time. Why didn't you enter the palace, but went to the temple instead? Wasn't this implying that she was having an affair with someone from the temple? Seeing that the Marchioness wasn't taking the bait, the Empress could only awkwardly end the topic with a joke. However, mentioning the temple reminded Alyssa of something. Ever since the Marchioness of Celt's rebellion 20 years ago, the royal family and the temple have been openly hostile. Although the royal family controlled the empire, they could never replace the temple's position in people's hearts. Despite seeing their deployments, they couldn't eliminate them. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Alyssa's confidence suddenly surged. Anyway, his main goal for this hunting competition, besides showing everyone that Liberlin is thriving after moving outside the royal palace, is to make more allies. If he can take this opportunity to win over the temple, it would definitely strengthen his plan. Unfortunately, in a moment of excitement, he spilled his tea all over Annie, who had the good sense to quickly step forward and help Alyssa clean up the stain. Unexpectedly, this act of service drew the princess's displeasure. It was simply because the clothes Annie was wearing weren't a standard uniform. It seems the Duke's family is as wealthy as the rumors say. Alyssa had been waiting for this comment. She smoothly explained the employee benefits of working for the Duke. For anyone who has worked for a certain number of years, he provides them with new clothes as a reward. While that's what she said, it's actually a tactic to attract talent. After all, at an event centered around the royal family, everyone's eyes are naturally on them. Rather than spending money on dressing themselves up, it's better to invest in servants and knights. By using the servants' attire to subtly highlight the Duke's generosity, the nobles might not think much of it, but those working in lower positions will certainly be envious. Who wouldn't want to work for a more generous employer? Seeing that the groundwork had been laid, Liehart smoothly brought up the discovery of a mine on the Duke's land and his intention to find partners. Based on the ladies' reactions, he could discern who held the purse strings in their families and who didn't. Alyssa expertly grasped the situation, and the women were quickly chatting excitedly. The Empress, annoyed at having her spotlight stolen, feigned a cough to change the subject and halt the conversation's momentum. But seeing the eager looks of potential partners, Alyssa had no reason to panic. Liehart, however, was unexpectedly served a plate of tranche. Smelling the strong, buttery aroma, his stomach suddenly churned. Fighting back nausea, he quickly stood up. Just as he rose, a wave of dizziness washed over him. Suddenly, he felt an arm around him. "Excuse me," Liehart said. "My wife hasn't been feeling well lately." As everyone stared in surprise, he scooped Alyssa up in his arms. "Goodbye, everyone." He carried his precious wife away, leaving in front of everyone. The princess fumed. Liehart, carrying Alyssa, pulled out 2 candies, his eyes full of concern. However, his tenderness towards his wife was met with mockery from the crown prince. Watching Liehart protectively hold Alyssa, the crown prince sneered, taunting him for being whipped and only caring about his wife. I hear you two haven't consummated your marriage yet. Is something wrong in that department? Liehart had been holding back, not wanting to cause a scene in front of his wife. But Alyssa couldn't tolerate it any longer. "Oh my God," she exclaimed. "Our child will be so sad to hear you say that." Everyone was stunned. Liehart burst out laughing, explaining that their wedding night was not only passionate, but also resulted in a blessing. "Carrying a baby is tiring," he said. "So we'll excuse ourselves now." The Crown Prince's eyes widened in disbelief. He couldn't believe that Liehart, after 7 years at war, had managed to have a child before him, and on the first try, no less. Even his 2 lackeys couldn't help but murmur. It seems the Crown Prince really isn't up to par, infuriating him further. Alyssa despised this kind of person who relied on their power to bully others. "How could you be so calm back there?" Liehart asked, still flustered by the earlier conversation. "I'm sorry," Alyssa said. "I know we weren't supposed to announce the pregnancy yet, but I couldn't stand to see you being insulted. Besides," she added, "I was just telling the truth. Our night was wonderful." She glanced at Liehart, expecting him to be angry, but he was blushing furiously. He chuckled, agreeing with her. But later that night, Liehart wasn't laughing. After putting Alyssa to sleep, a maid delivered a letter for Alyssa. Seeing that it was from Ansel, he wanted to burn it. Even though Alyssa said they were just friends, there's no guarantee that guy doesn't have other ideas. Maybe he's been waiting for her divorce so he can take my place. If he said something like that, Alyssa would be disappointed in me. While I was agonizing over this, Alyssa suddenly woke up. I ended up swallowing my worries. Seeing Alyssa focused on reading, my heart ached terribly. Even the next day, while working, my mind was full of the contents of that letter. It turned out, Ansel had asked Alyssa to meet this afternoon. While talking to my secretary, my mind was miles away. I just up and left work, telling myself I was overthinking. But I unconsciously found myself outside the bedroom door. Calling for Alyssa to open it, I immediately froze. Alyssa was dressed so beautifully, even wearing a pink dress. Seeing her happily rush towards me, my jealousy couldn't help but boil over. "You look awful in that." My wife was going on a date with my rival, and she was dressed like a goddess. Wouldn't that bewitch anyone? I sulked and said, "It's too ugly, go change." Even though I knew I was being childish. I just couldn't stand the thought of Ansel, who'd had a crush on Alyssa since childhood, seeing her so beautiful. Before I could finish, Alyssa burst into tears. "Can't you just say it looks nice? Sal look good in it." She yelled, "I want to wear this. I want to wear this dress now." I didn't expect such a strong reaction. Panicked, I tried to soothe her, but she kicked me out. I banged on the door. "I'm sorry." There was still no response. I was filled with regret, cursing myself for being an idiot. How could I say such a thing just because I was jealous? Alyssa must be having a hard time being pregnant. Thinking it over, I knocked again to "I'm sorry. Go and talk to Ansel. Come back when you're done." Alyssa's tear-stained face finally softened a bit. She told the maid to help her fix her makeup, but she couldn't stop feeling wronged. Even though the maids took her side, saying I didn't understand fashion, I knew I was being unreasonable. I was acting like a child. Neither Alyssa nor I knew this was called a pregnancy mood swing. Pregnant women are affected by hormones and can become uncontrollably emotional or depressed. Hearing the maid say that everyone who's pregnant is like this, Alyssa finally calmed down. While she was finishing her makeup, Ansel arrived at the Duke's mansion. He was not only grown up now, but also a famous entrepreneur. Led by the butler, he walked towards the back garden. Glancing back, he saw my scowling face upstairs. He'd known since childhood that the Duke wasn't easy to get along with, but he hadn't expected me to be even colder after returning from the battlefield. Good heavens, Alyssa's life probably isn't easy. Remembering Alyssa's previous canceled meeting, he became even more worried, fearing she'd been caught while trying to escape. So, as soon as he saw her, before they could even exchange pleasantries, he asked the question on his mind, did I this marriage a happy one? Alyssa wondered what exactly constituted happy, but at least she didn't feel unhappy. Ansel finally breathed a sigh of relief, but he still couldn't understand Alyssa's taste. She actually thought the intimidating Duke was naive. How was he naive? What surprised him even more was that Alyssa was pregnant. He offered stiff congratulations, swallowing the words he'd originally intended to say. After all, how could he tell her what he'd seen at the villa while Alyssa was focusing on her pregnancy? This was the first meeting between the two women. Yet they didn't recognize each other. It even ended quite unpleasantly. Because of a man, the Pope's fifth lover, Alyssa was determined to build a good relationship. She immediately offered to donate $2 million to the temple. However, her ulterior motives were seen through, and the Pope flatly refused her donation. She persisted in asking why, but the Pope was quite blunt in his rejection. Not only could he not provide what he wanted, but the Pope also bid farewell to any attempts to utilize the temple. He was momentarily embarrassed. He originally planned to use the temple, deeply loved by the people, to leverage donations to gain the right to a noble family for childbirth, using this, in turn, to suppress the royal family. That's why he wanted to start with donations, then find an opportunity to approach the Pope. Never did he expect that the Marchioness and his appointment would actually be chosen to take place at the temple, and that she would even introduce him to the Pope. Such a golden opportunity couldn't be missed, but now it seems he has to give it up for the time being. After all, if the Pope accepted his donation, the temple would inevitably be dragged into the power struggle. So even if he's dirt poor, the Pope must refuse the donation to maintain absolute neutrality. And he has persisted in this way for 20 years, just to protect those who believe in him. Alyssa knew very well that such a principled and intelligent person would not be easily defeated. But it wasn't that there was no way through. He decided to change his strategy. He admitted his motives were impure, but not entirely self-serving. I heard that the temple has taken in many orphans from the recent war. Don't those children need help? Once I, Lubin, donate, the royal family will also feel pressure to make a gesture. So please use me. He thought that even with this case, the Pope and the temple could still maintain neutrality. Just as the Pope hesitated, a young priest broke the silence. Seeing how eager he was to leave, Alyssa knew her attempt had failed. Comforted by the Marchioness, he wasn't actually that discouraged. Besides, this outcome was within his expectations, and he already had a new plan. The next day, he came to the temple again, having researched the Pope's daily routine beforehand. His first step was to pretend to run into him. Although he wanted to join forces with the temple for his own benefit, seeing those orphan children, he genuinely wanted to help. He also truly admired the temple's actions. After all, providing education and protection for children was originally the royal family's responsibility, but the temple had shouldered it, and they had persisted for over 20 years. If it weren't for the Marchioness's support, they probably wouldn't have lasted until today. So, to dispel the Pope's reservations, he had to prove his sincerity. He came to the path the Pope always took. While he was worrying about how to appear natural, Annie spotted a flower by the roadside. He thought this was a good idea. However, in the blink of an eye, he saw that a lone flower had withered. Perhaps it was because it wasn't within the flower bed. Both master and servant were instantly filled with sympathy. Annie went to fetch water to water it. Alyssa also thought it was a good idea. She watched Annie's retreating figure, but didn't notice the faint blue light emanating from her own body. The light gradually condensed into water droplets, falling directly onto the flower. When she looked back, she was surprised to find that the withered flower had instantly regained its vitality, even emitting a golden glow. Before she had time to examine it, her target appeared. She quickly got up to approach him. When asked what she was doing at the temple, she used prayer as an excuse. She thought he would ask her what she was praying for, but he simply offered a brief blessing and then hurried off, seemingly both gentle and indifferent. She had no reason to linger. However, she was a persistent young lady. Giving herself a pep talk, she decided to rest early and try again tomorrow. Unexpectedly, Liehart suddenly appeared, holding a storybook, wanting to read to the children. He looked cautious, as if afraid of being thrown out. Alyssa then remembered that after their last argument, to avoid awkwardness, he had been deliberately going to bed early every day. Since he was making the first move to reconcile, she said, "Go ahead and read." This made Liehart overjoyed. He sat on the edge of the bed and solemnly opened the book. GLA glass, forest, north, there is an one enters forest. His halting, stiff rhythm made Alyssa, listening beside him, cringe. How can anyone read a fairy tale so dully? But seeing his serious expression, she felt a pang of sadness. She hadn't expected her husband, of all people, to care so much about armor. She watched him and couldn't resist reaching out and touching it like it was some precious treasure. Her husband looked at her quizzically. Alyssa realized there was a hair on Liehart's face. Thinking she must be going mad, she excused herself, saying she had to get up early for the temple the next day, and quickly climbed into bed. Since the chance encounter plan wasn't working, she changed tactics. She decided to regularly pray at the temple and care for sick orphans. Today, she brought the children delicious chocolates. Even while pregnant, she's so thoughtful. The young priest felt a pang of guilt. It was a relief that the Pope was no longer deliberately avoiding her. Even though he wasn't particularly fond of angels, he still accepted the chocolate she offered. Seeing how well she interacted with the children, Lubin thought, "Please use me," that is, use Lubin's name. The Pope seemed to be wavering. The Duchess had taken in a child. The child turned out to be the son of her love rival, and, even more surprisingly, the handsome, fire-wielding male lead of the novel Birdcage. Although he was the Crown Prince's son, he led an unfortunate life because of it. It turned out that after learning of Alyssa's pregnancy, the Crown Prince and his wife fell out of favor. They had been married for 4 years and hadn't even produced an egg. Yet, some people, having just returned from the battlefield, conceive an heir on their first try. Faced with their parents' pressure to have children, the young couple thought they just had to endure it. However, the emperor wasn't satisfied. He wasn't even sure if the Crown Prince had any illegitimate children, so he immediately ordered a search. This put immense pressure on the Crown Princess. She dragged the Crown Prince to try and reason with Alyssa, but Alyssa wouldn't even speak to them. The Crown Princess was furious, but she only dared to blame Alyssa. Fortunately, a maid arrived to report that the child's living quarters had been prepared. Get rid of him immediately. Meanwhile, in a bookstore, Alyssa was browsing fairy tale books when she saw a suspicious, dirty little boy stuffing a fairy tale book under his clothes. She reached out and stopped him, patiently explaining to the child that stealing was wrong. So, give me the book you're holding. Suddenly, the bookstore owner appeared with a cheerful smile, but seeing the book in the little beggar's arms, his expression immediately changed. Not only did he grab the child, but he was determined to hit him. How could a child of just a few years old withstand such a blow? Alyssa couldn't bear to watch. She tried to intervene, but the owner told her to get lost. How dare he be so insolent in front of Lubin's wife? After she revealed her identity, the owner immediately became submissive. But you can't protect this kind of person. In the owner's eyes, someone who started stealing at such a young age was incorrigible. Alyssa disagreed, perhaps because she was about to become a mother herself. She sided with the child. After all, the owner was also at fault. Not only did he fail to teach the child, but he also wanted to hit a child of only a few years old. She told the owner she would compensate him for the loss, but he also had to apologize to the child. The owner reluctantly complied. This seemingly biased act, however, was about to change the child's life. She took the child to a bakery, and, seeing how hungry he looked, she felt a pang of sympathy. "Why do you look so familiar? Especially with that jet black, red hair. What's your name, little one?" Leon answered in a childish voice. She was startled. It was the Crown Prince's, that scoundrel's son. Her own son's future rival. Remembering the 2 royal knights she had encountered on the street earlier, she had a bad feeling. In the original story, the royal family ordered a search for the Crown Prince's illegitimate son. But the Crown Princess decided to strike first. On a dark and stormy night, young Leon was cornered in a dead end by assassins hired by the Crown Princess. Though he unleashed flames to protect himself, he couldn't control the fire and burned down the entire village. This incident shocked the empire, and young Leon was discovered and brought to the imperial palace. With a childhood similar to Lihart's, Alyssa couldn't help but feel sorry for the motherless child. How could she leave him? But she couldn't bring him back to the Duke's mansion. Suddenly, an idea struck her. She thought a good place. "Leon, would you like to come with me?" Leon agreed. The hidden assassins were speechless. Fortunately, they arrived safely at their destination. Seeing the Pope, Alyssa finally felt at ease. She hoped the Pope would take the child in. But after learning the child's identity, the Pope hesitated. The 5-year-old beggar's first display of fire astounded the Pope. He hadn't expected the little beggar to be of royal blood, yet living on the streets since a young age. And now he was being hunted by the Crown Princess. But even with his pitiful circumstances, the Pope had no intention of taking him in, because beautiful sparks always burn everything, especially since the child didn't understand how to control it properly. This concern did indeed happen in the original story. Alyssa knew this all too well, but it was precisely for this reason that she wanted the Pope to take him in. If you guide him carefully, these deadly sparks could bring warmth to people. Why do you think so? Because you're the most righteous person I know. Her sincere words moved the Pope. He agreed to take Leon in, but also demanded proof of the crown princess's involvement in the assassination attempt within a week. After all, Leon's royal identity held no benefit for the temple. Alyssa happily agreed. The first thing she did, after returning home, was to organize her memories of the assassination attempt. The crown princess hadn't used her family's forces to attack Leon. Instead, she had hired mercenaries from a certain guild. While it seemed simple enough, she couldn't go to the mercenaries herself. Then her husband appeared, and she suddenly had an idea. Ask her husband to handle it. She felt bad, as it involved assassination and an illegitimate child, without any concrete evidence. Surprisingly, her husband readily agreed. What she didn't expect was him saying, "I believe everything you say. Even if I'm being deceived, I'm willing." Her husband's unconditional trust and silly words made Alyssa's heart flutter. Unable to speak, she coughed to hide her embarrassment and excused herself to sleep. Seeing her flustered and blushing, Liehart couldn't help but be amused. Not long after, a man barged into the mercenary guild and demanded to see the person in charge. A few mercenaries were initially wary, but they weren't pushovers. One lunged at the hothead with a dagger, but the man simply dodged and grabbed him by the scruff of his neck. He tossed him aside, startling everyone present. Liehart repeated his earlier demand. Finally, he met with the person in charge. He got straight to the point. "Bring out the mercenaries who took the crown princess's orders." He called out to a scarred man. He was losing his patience. A gust of wind nearly knocked the scarred man off his feet. Looking at the shattered window behind him, the scarred man had a suspicion. Liehart walked towards him step by step. "If you dare disobey my orders, you'll all die." With his ruthless efficiency, he obtained the evidence. Thinking of getting it back to his wife quickly, he was annoyed to find himself being followed. He quickly ducked into another alley, then reappeared behind the person. "Are you looking for me?" Count Alden was stunned to learn his daughter-in-law was an imposter. The real Alyssa had died 8 years ago. The girl in the painting at the villa didn't look like Alyssa as a child either. Ansel felt a chill down his spine. Who was the Alyssa he knew? The question kept swirling in his mind. He wanted to tell Liehart the truth, but hesitated. He hadn't expected to be called a stalking rat by that violent, viper-like man. How would Liehart react to Alyssa after learning the truth? After much deliberation, he decided to be unreasonable. "How much do you love her?" Liehart, who already considered Ansel a rival, slammed the table in anger upon hearing the question. "Are you trying to steal my wife? Your answer will determine whether I tell you the truth." Faced with Liehart's incomprehension, Ansel hesitated for a long time, then finally told him about renovating the old house for Alyssa and his conversation with the doctor. Alyssa had died 8 years ago in a ruin. Liehart wasn't just unhappy. He felt the same way at the time. But when he saw the painting at the villa, he had to believe it. Hearing this, Liehart's heart lurched. If this was true, it meant his wife was hiding something. But his first reaction was fear that she would be in danger. He had to stop this from happening. He couldn't bear to see her get hurt. He desperately wanted to know more, but Ansel didn't elaborate. He, too, feared for Alyssa's safety. He had wanted to tell Alyssa, but couldn't bring himself to do it. That's why he decided to tell Liehart. Liehart breathed a sigh of relief and, unusually, praised his rival's actions. Compared to Ansel's turmoil, he seemed calm. No matter the truth, Alyssa was still his most cherished family. His response left Ansel ashamed. He had thought this was the perfect opportunity to win Alyssa over, but Liehart's love was no less than his own. He was disappointed, but also happy for Alyssa. However, Ansel's honesty about his feelings didn't bother Liehart as much, as long as Ansel didn't show it in front of Alyssa. After warning his rival, Liehart hurried home. Seeing his wife sleeping restlessly, he patted her sheen kungda. No one knew better than him that the Duke, who orchestrated their marriage, couldn't have been deceived. And Alyssa had lost her memory at that time. Even if she regained it, she might have forgotten everything. The only person capable of concealing all this was that old Duke Chien. But he couldn't ask a dead man for the truth. Perhaps there was someone else who could tell him, though. The old Duke's aide. He ordered Thompson to quickly find the aide. The secret of the mercenary guild canceling the assassination order had reached the crown princess. She had already heard that Alyssa had taken the child. Furious, she slammed her fist and threw a teacup. In her anger, a new plot began to brew. How dare that woman threaten the crown princess's child? Her attendants didn't dare to breathe. Early that morning, Alyssa received a letter. It was an invitation from the crown princess to the palace. It was clearly a trap. A smirk played on her lips. Just what she wanted. The next moment, she arrived at the palace alone, seeing the maids waiting at the gate. She realized the crown princess was even more eager than she was. She followed the maids inside. Alyssa greeted the crown princess with a graceful curtsy. The crown princess, of course, responded with equal grace and decorum, thanking her for coming, especially considering the difficulties of pregnancy. "You're too kind, but this is the first time you've summoned me. I was quite surprised." Both women maintained a polite facade. The real battle had just begun. The crown princess thoughtfully offered tea, but the type wasn't suitable for pregnant women. Alyssa, not being foolish, politely declined, claiming morning sickness. Another exchange of pleasantries followed. The crown princess finally revealed her true intentions that "I heard the Duchess has been sponsoring some orphans." Upon receiving confirmation, her eyes lit up with excitement. Hearing that the children had been entrusted to an orphanage, she eagerly inquired about its name, claiming she wanted to contribute to a worthy cause. "But why did you choose to sponsor that particular one?" Alyssa's unexpected question left the crown princess speechless. Seeing Alyssa's radiant, knowing smile, the crown princess claimed she sponsored all the orphanages in the empire. She had never felt so dumbfounded. Since hinting wasn't working, she dropped the pretense. "Where are you hiding that child?" Her menacing expression seemed almost comical. Alyssa feigned ignorance, claiming she didn't know. Enraged, the crown princess slammed her fist on the table, overturning her teacup. She threatened to report Alyssa to the emperor. Alyssa remained unfazed at, "Is it wrong to take in a child without parents? Or are you going to claim I'm hiding His Majesty's grandson? But you don't have a shred of credible evidence. You, a mere country bumpkin from a baronet family, dare to be so insolent." Alyssa calmly watched the performance. As the crown princess neared her breaking point, Alyssa slid a piece of paper across the table. It was evidence of the crown princess hiring assassins. How it came into Alyssa's possession was irrelevant. The key issue was that the crown princess, in her position, had attempted to murder an innocent child. But please remember, if you want to preserve your precious life, don't harm him again. After delivering her warning, Alyssa tucked the evidence into her small bag, offered a bright, polite smile, and suggested they meet again. The crown princess could only fume as she watched Alyssa depart. The moment the door closed, the sounds of crashing and banging erupted from the room. Just as Alyssa had predicted, the haughty and arrogant crown princess. What else could she do but seethe with anger? A first-time father was experiencing the joys of childcare. He'd managed to make the baby cry. Serves him right for marrying my wife. He has good taste, I'll give him that, Lionheart thought smugly. But my sister belongs to me alone. Today was the day Alyssa was visiting the temple. As she prepared to leave, Lionheart insisted on joining her, wanting to see the child. Perhaps due to their similar childhoods, he was concerned about the child's future. Though still young, the child possessed unusual powers. Alyssa wanted to respect the child's wishes, only wanting him to grow up healthy and happy. Of course, Lionheart would join her, but upon seeing the child for the first time, he kept calling Alyssa sister. But wasn't his hair supposed to be red? He learned the child was wearing a wig and was being presented as a relative of the Pope. Before they could discuss it further, Alyssa was leaving him alone with the child. He just wanted to be with his sister. "But I have important business to discuss with the Pope." He felt like a puppy being abandoned. He dejectedly watched Alyssa leave. Suddenly, a small voice called uncle. He almost deflated entirely. The child had just called Alyssa sister, but young Leon was simply too adorable, inviting him to play in his room. How could he get angry at a child? Little Leon's small head looked so big. He asked, "Are uncle and sister friends?" "No, we're married." Unexpectedly, this made the little guy cry. Good thing he had candy with him. Kids are kids, after all. One piece of candy, and he was overjoyed. Their relationship instantly cleared up, just as they arrived in the room. Little Leon scampered off to the fireplace, his hands releasing sparks. Lionheart thought it was some kind of magic, but I just wanted to make you warmer. Looking at the little one's serious expression, he felt an inexplicable pang in his heart. For a child this age to be able to release such power meant they'd either experienced life and death or extreme psychological torment. Even Alyssa felt sorry for him. How could he not feel anything? He secretly channeled his power throughout the room. When wisps of wind and sparks converged, "Uncle, look, I lit the fire." He affectionately patted the little head. "It's so warm." Meanwhile, the Pope stood before the statue. Sensing Alyssa's arrival, he had a secret to confess. It's all the rage to marry first and love later. But this silly girl already has a baby. It still treats the child's father like a stranger. Unexpectedly, a sheer nightgown finally made Alyssa aware of her feelings. She had intended to change, but her husband appeared at that moment. That is the new dress. Seeing her husband's surprised look, she felt incredibly embarrassed, afraid of being misunderstood as intentionally seductive. But her husband acted very naturally, even draping his coat around her. She, who had been embarrassed, suddenly felt annoyed. Even though the weather's getting warmer, it's still. Shouldn't he have said it looked good on her, that it suited her? Thinking this, she called out to Liehart, "Doesn't this dress look good?" "Yes, it suits you very well." Although reluctant, he finally said the right thing. "But your belly seems to be sticking out." Instantly, his soothing words were lost on her. All she could think about was her protruding belly. Wasn't he saying she'd gotten fat? The more she thought about it, the angrier she got. She abruptly sat up in bed and threw the coat back at Liehart like a cape. Looking at his confused face, she said, "It's nothing. I think there was a mosquito," leaving him utterly bewildered. She felt satisfied at the time, but regretted it the next day. It was a perfectly normal outfit, yet she'd inexplicably thrown the coat back. It made it seem like she dressed that way to please him, but there was no need for that. After all, no one tries to please a friend. She tried to convince herself with this self-deception, but then realized something was wrong. She couldn't help but picture her husband's handsome face. Could I actually have impure thoughts? Ouch! She seemed to have discovered something alarming. She finally understood her feelings for Liehart. It wasn't the fondness of a friend, but the attraction of one gender to another. And it was so intense. But what should she do? She didn't know how to face her husband. The thought of sharing a bed with him that night made her face flush crimson. Unexpectedly, dressed in her nightgown, she ran into Liehart, feeling his usual concern. She couldn't remain calm. She subtly pulled away from his hand. "Let's go back to our room." This unusual behavior made Liehart worry. His wife must be sick. Fortunately, the doctor said there was nothing wrong, and the baby was healthy. If you feel any fetal movement, be sure to respond to the baby. You're in a stable period now, so you can also travel around to change your mood. The two new parents listened attentively, but blushed when the doctor suggested appropriate intimacy. After the doctor said goodbye, Alyssa's heart fluttered uncontrollably. "Let's go on an outing," he said, blushing slightly, suggesting a picnic. But to some, it seemed like he had another 104-degree fever, so it would be better to go later. Even though the doctor said everything was fine, Liehart still felt differently. It wouldn't be good if it affected the baby. Listening to her husband's reasonable analysis, Alyssa felt a surge of anger the baby is important. "But I'm not." After his wife cried, he finally blurted out, "I love you. Do you see my sincerity?" Alyssa had waited so long for this moment. It felt like a beautiful dream. After all, she had just snapped at the man, feeling like he only cared about the baby. But after calming down, she regretted it. She really couldn't control herself. "Liehart must be tired of me." Unexpectedly, the man found her first. Calling her name, "Alyssa," he knelt down on one knee. This was quite surprising, but even more surprising was that Liehart bravely expressed his inner thoughts. "Because you're the first precious person I've ever had, I don't know what to do. Could you please let me a little?" The man's choked voice was extremely humble. "Just like you really like me." Alyssa couldn't help but feel a pang in her nose. Her heart was in turmoil. Does he feel the same way I do? She wasn't sure. Lowering her head, she said, "I don't hate you. I actually like you. But my kind of like is probably different from yours." Liehart's eyes instantly lit up. Unexpectedly, his wife then said she wanted to sleep alone. He abruptly stood up and hugged her tightly. "Did you mean it when you said you liked me?" The 6-foot-tall man was like a child who had made a mistake. Even if his wife didn't admit it, it didn't matter. "I'll prove my sincerity." His first confession in 7 years of marriage. Alyssa still couldn't believe it. She was afraid her husband was only saying these things out of sense of responsibility. "But I love you simply because you are Alyssa, and I fell in love with you a long time ago." "Then why have you never said you loved me?" His wife burst into tears. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. It wasn't that Liehart didn't want to, but he was worried it was unrequited and afraid that his love would put pressure on his wife. Looking back now, it was all my fault." He gently kissed his wife's forehead. Once again, he bared his soul. Before, he only wanted revenge. It was as if that was all there was to life. But then she came into his life. The emptiness in his heart was filled with warmth. How could he not love such a radiant girl? His goal of revenge had subtly shifted. "Now I just want to be happy with you, with our child. This is not just a goal, it's my wish. So, will you help me achieve it?" Alyssa deeply moved, stretched out her hand, standing on tiptoe, as if only this way could she respond to his passionate heart. Finally, she was able to embrace the one she loved. She was still secretly reveling in it the next day. It felt so amazing to be loved. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. She thought it was Liehart, but it was Annie. It was a letter from the royal palace, along with an invitation. It was for a tea party specifically held by the king to celebrate the founding of the nation. She then remembered there was such an event in early July. But why hold a tea party at this time? Besides, the crown princess and the queen didn't seem like people who would invite her. After all, the last time at the palace had been quite unpleasant. After thinking about it, she concluded it must be because of that incident. She told Annie to reply that she would attend. But at the same time, she asked her to send a letter to the Earl's mansion. That confident look in her eyes clearly indicated something was up. The first time the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law plotted against someone, they were publicly humiliated. This elegant tea party, hosted by the queen, had only one requirement, a pink evening gown. But Alyssa's invitation specified a yellow gown, while the Marchioness's indicated blue. To prevent them from conferring after realizing the discrepancy, the crown princess deliberately included the same incorrect starting time on both invitations. With the tea party about to begin, only those two were absent. The crown princess couldn't help but gloat inwardly, believing her scheme brilliant. She even began fantasizing about the scene of her and her mother-in-law triumphing over the two women. A quick glance, and her lackey immediately understood, "Oh dear, it's about to start." "Where is the Duchess of Luberon?" the lackey muttered, stirring up gossip and directing attention to Alyssa's absence. The queen entered, passing the buck to her daughter-in-law. "What's going on?" The crown princess feigned helplessness. "Since the duchess said she would attend, I'm sure she won't be absent." "My, how kind you are." Hearing this flattery, she couldn't help but smirk. They exchanged a few more pleasantries, and then Zheng Ai Li's eyes widened. "Excuse me," Alyssa said, entering with the Marchioness, both smiling. There was a bit of traffic. Not only had they arrived on time, but they were also wearing gowns that matched the pink theme. The crown princess was dumbfounded. How was she supposed to explain this to her mother-in-law? She didn't realize that her supposedly clever scheme was, to Alyssa, nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The dress color and starting time, those were easily verifiable details. It was time for Alyssa to put on a show. Actually, the time on my invitation was a bit unclear, and the dress requirement was different. Could it be that a maid mistook my relationship with the crown prince as being poor? How could a maid do such a thing? The other ladies chimed in, fueling the drama. The crown princess was both furious and unable to lash out. She desperately needed a scapegoat. Slap! She struck her own maid. "How dare you do this behind my back? I sincerely apologize, Duchess." This public display of accountability seemed to work. The uninformed and naive ladies began to criticize the poor maid. The terrified maid apologized profusely. "It's all right. I forgive you. Everyone makes mistakes. So, Your Highness, please calm down." The look in Alyssa's eyes was a clear warning. The crown princess was seething. The atmosphere grew tense. A quick-witted guest changed the subject to the tea. The conversation shifted, and the tea party finally proceeded peacefully. Meanwhile, at the family meeting, Liehart was also facing opposition. A troublesome man suggested offering the kingdom's surplus grain to the royal family. After the proposal was swiftly rejected, despite the ensuing uproar, Liehart adjourned the meeting. Ignoring the man's grumbling, he entered his office. "We have news about that person. Let's depart now." His wife of 7 years was dead. The only one who knew the truth, Duke Qian, was gone. Liehart had to find someone, Duke Qian's closest aide. Where did the old man bring Alyssa from? The aide claimed ignorance. He had only fabricated a suitable background for her. But one thing was strange. Duke Qian had left him in several nights, entering the sacred wood alone. He had supposedly gone to seek a sage, a member of a certain family who had become one with the sacred wood. But the specific reason for the meeting? The aide didn't know, nor did he know if Duke Qian had met the sage. He only knew that the Duke had returned with Alyssa unconscious. Duke Qian said, "I've found the answer." It sounded just like Alyssa. It was what the old man had been searching for his whole life. Liehart felt a chill, though he didn't know the reason. But there must be clues in the sacred wood. After exchanging a few pleasantries with his aide, he ordered Thompson to investigate all clues in the sacred wood. With only a few days left until the founding festival, Alyssa was helping with preparations at the temple every day. She seemed to have endless energy. Suddenly, she noticed a child. It was none other than little Leon, holding a small piece of wire covered in dirt, squatting there. Upon asking, she learned he was pulling weeds. He looked very confident, but it seemed like he was pulling up flowers. Seeing the little guy so happy, Alyssa was happy too, but she still went to wash him clean. Just then, the little guy zoomed off like a duck. He wasn't paying attention and bumped into someone's knee. He landed on his bottom with a thud. When she saw who it was, Alyssa had a bad feeling. The person he bumped into was none other than the Crown Prince, Leon's biological father. Hey Brad, didn't they teach you at the temple to apologize when you bump into someone? The Crown Prince's tone was unpleasant. Even though Leon apologized, he became even more annoyed that he has so much money, and they raised such a stupid child. Your Highness, that's too harsh on a child, Alyssa retorted. This gave him the opportunity to mock the Duchess. By the way, can you move? He pointed to the trembling hand clinging to Alyssa's dress. He said something about teaching him a lesson, as his white clothes were quite expensive. I'm so sorry. Your Highness is so magnanimous. Please forgive this child. Since the Duchess was being so humble, the Crown Prince pretended to drop the matter. But he continued to mutter about low-class families and how only stupid parents would raise such a child. Alyssa had never seen anyone insult her like this. But little Leon, unaware of the situation, was stung by his words. A spark of anger ignited in his small hand. My mother is not stupid. This was the inherited duty of the royal family. It was going to be exposed. His sister was 5 months pregnant, but thought she was constipated. This was the first time he knew a baby grew in the belly. Little Leon stared with his sixth sense eyes for a long time. Just now, the Crown Prince had called his mother stupid. A flame ignited in his palm, wanting to teach him a lesson. His identity was about to be exposed. No, you can't. Alyssa quickly grabbed his hand, not noticing that her own hands were also emitting shadows. She was terrified that Leon's identity would be discovered. Fortunately, the Crown Prince was foolish enough not to notice. He turned and left, eager to meet the Pope. They had narrowly escaped. What do I do? Did I hurt you? Little Leon's tears welled up in his eyes. But strangely, although he should have been burned, there wasn't a single mark on him. While she was puzzling over this, Lionheart walked in. Little Leon reached out and rushed towards him, but then hesitated, feeling dirty. It's okay. Lionheart picked up the little boy. He looked so loving, truly like a father. He wiped the little guy's hands and praised him. Then Leon noticed his sister's belly. Their poop in sister's belly? There's a baby in sister's belly. The baby will be sad if you say that. Then how'd the baby get there? How was she supposed to answer that? Alyssa glanced at Hart, equally embarrassed and helpless. She vaguely explained that it happens when you kiss someone you love. Do you love Sue? Of course, and I love you too, sister. If I kiss you, will we have a baby? Little Leon was already excitedly wanting to try. Alyssa panicked and quickly explained that it requires love. But whether it was love or not didn't seem to matter to his young mind. His little brain word. Even if you don't like or love someone, if you kiss them, you'll have a baby. So you can't just kiss anyone. So, did sister feel unwell before she had the baby? That's right. Alyssa finally managed to fool him. She didn't know that someone had already figured things out. He squatted on the ground, feeling inexpressibly bitter because I would never kiss someone I don't love. He kicked 2 pebbles. He could only silently apologize. The princess's power went out late at night. A man, so drunk he could barely walk straight, came to find her. He started complaining the moment he saw her. Apparently, he'd been slighted by Lionheart during the day. He'd wanted to offer the emperor the leftover budget from an event, but he was completely ignored. Upon hearing this, the princess angrily scolded Lionheart and Alyssa, wishing she could punish the couple, and the opportunity presented itself. The butler arrived, saying a certain man had come by earlier. The man initially didn't want to bother, as this particular individual's business ventures always failed. He wanted to take the princess back to bed, but then he suddenly remembered something. That guy had previously introduced him to something. He'd said it wouldn't sell because of Lublin. A wicked smile crept across the man's face. His chance for revenge had come. His wife was pregnant, but he didn't know who the father was. He thought he'd find answers by investigating the sacred wood, but he'd searched all the nearby villages. Not a single blonde, blue-eyed girl had been reported missing. He never expected the answer answered to be right in front of him. Today was the founding festival, although the temple was packed with commoners and nobles. Alyssa sensed something was amiss. Marquis Davin, standing beside the princess, had brought over a dozen knights with him today. Usually, one or two would suffice for such an event, but she didn't think much of it. Inside the vast temple hall, the priest droned on for 2 hours. He wasn't the only one bored. Even the others were nodding off. He assumed the play would be equally unremarkable, but it turned out to hold the secret of his birth. The play depicted a time when the world was ruled by demons. The goddess divided her power among 3 children. They represented 3 different families, and together they fought the Demon King and protected the people. Unfortunately, the Demon King was too powerful. The 3 family heads began to struggle. Fortunately, the royal family, inheriting the power of the Crimson Flame, arrived in time. Together, they defeated the Demon King and saved the world. But not long after, the demons trapped in the contaminated emperor regained their strength. The blonde-haired family head sacrificed himself for his beloved first emperor. He also created the purifying fox in the contaminated emperor. Alyssa never believed this fabricated history to be true. After all, history is always written by the victors. But when he heard about the purifying fox, his nerves were instantly on edge. Tears streamed down his face, as if he had some deep connection to the deceased. "It's okay. It's just a play." Liehart's comforting words had barely left his mouth when the play became reality. A horde of monsters suddenly burst into the temple, with more swarming in. Everyone panicked and fled. Liehart held Alyssa tightly, trying to escape, but his subordinates reported they were outnumbered. Their only option was to hide. They quickly retreated to a safe area. But there were too few holy knights, seeing commoner children being attacked by the monsters. Alyssa feared they would lose their lives. She tugged on Liehart's arm. "Go save them," she pleaded, near tears. But Liehart was only concerned for her safety. He didn't want to watch those children die before his eyes. As Liehart hesitated, his subordinates reassured him, "Don't worry. We will protect the Duchess with our lives." With their promise, Liehart finally made up his mind. With a gust of wind, he reluctantly released his grip on Alyssa. "Alyssa, I'll be right back." Seeing his wife about to die in someone else's arms, the man went berserk. The man who could only kill one monster with a single blow moments ago, now with a flick of his wrist, instantly obliterated all the monsters. His wife asked him to save the others. Liehart was actually reluctant, but seeing 2 commoner children about to die, he finally reluctantly let go of Alyssa's hand. Just one. The ferocious bird let out a blood-curdling shriek. Although these mushrooms weren't difficult to deal with, he still felt something was wrong. These purified mushrooms generally didn't leave the forest. But now, not only had they come to the city and attacked humans, but there were also quite a few of them. He looked away for a moment, and a large bird swooped towards where Alyssa was running. Although Thompson killed it with 1 slash, another one lunged forward. With the force of a 300 miles per hour dive, it hurtled towards Alyssa, who looked like a sitting duck. Thompson had no choice but to shield her with his own body. A scream came from Alyssa. Liehart immediately felt a surge of dread. When he turned his head, he saw the scene before him. No, this can't be. He seemed possessed. Suddenly, the image of a woman with long, black hair appeared in his mind. The woman seemed to be disappearing, but a dark figure reached out a hand, pleading, "Don't go." His own outstretched hand mirrored the dark figure's movement. Suddenly, a captivating black aura emanated from him. Calling Alyssa's name, he swiftly unleashed a deadly black energy from his palm. Almost simultaneously, all the monsters plummeted to the ground. Alyssa was stunned. How could all the monsters suddenly be dead? She looked up and saw her husband falling towards her, enveloped in black aura. Although she didn't understand what the black aura was, it seemed to be consuming her husband bit by bit. This couldn't continue. Thinking this, she tightly embraced her husband. "Liehart, wake up." A dazzling light suddenly emanated from her hands, though no one noticed. Her anxious tears fell one by one. Thankfully, her husband just seemed a little dizzy, but she was still worried. "You killed all the monsters, but you're surrounded by a dark aura." Liehart sensed Alyssa's unease and gave her a warm hug. "That I'm really fine." The Emperor, however, had a major issue. He hadn't yet figured out how the monsters had gotten in, especially during the founding international festival. As emperor, how could he not have foreseen this? He had a terrible headache, but he didn't notice the person snickering beside him. He foolishly thanked the other person. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have returned safely. Marquis Davin, while verbally expressing concern for the citizens' safety, hinted with his eyes that the princess should step forward. I heard your uncle developed a new perfume, and its scent can repel monsters. Davin pretended to have just remembered. He smoothly introduced the perfume's compact size and life-saving properties. The emperor, upon hearing this, thought it was indeed a good thing. After all, he had just experienced a life-or-death situation. He immediately decided to mass-produce it. But the triumphant Davin wasn't done yet. Well, someone has to take responsibility for what happened today. The security around the imperial capital has always been Duke Lublin's responsibility. Although the emperor wasn't very bright, he was excellent at shifting blame, especially when it came to an opportunity to undermine Lublin. He praised the Marquis, saying he was right. He wanted Duke Lublin to report tomorrow. His villainous expression made one want to punch him. Alyssa was almost in tears, but Liehart had to leave. The aura that had suddenly surrounded him. Alyssa was worried and afraid, but her husband had to stay at the temple alone to prevent further monster attacks. The entire temple was now protected by a barrier set up by the Pope. Liehart knew that staying wouldn't help. The couple embraced, reluctant to part. The Pope watched them with knowing eyes, but couldn't speak. Now, he had to heal Liehart, but as soon as he used his holy power, Liehart cried out in pain. Strands of the aura emanated from his body. The Pope was stunned. What was going on? He pulled up a chair and sat down, asking about the situation. Liehart explained that he had visited the contaminated canyon 3 months prior and might have been inadvertently tainted then. But the Pope knew clearly that it was a malevolent aura and not an ordinary one. It was exactly the same as the one he had sensed back then. But what was worse was that this malevolent aura had already seeped into the cracks of Liehart's soul. Once he used Victory Evolution, the painful symptoms from earlier would appear. Even if he was in a hurry, there was no way to maintain the barrier while completing the evolution. So it had to be postponed until next time. However, he had already partially evolved, so presumably there wouldn't be any major issues for the time being. But to prevent a recurrence of the earlier outburst, you should maintain your distance from your wife. After sending Liehart away, the Pope pondered. He knew the power the Duchess had used just now. It was the unique, holy power of his own family. But Alyssa's family had no connection to the Celt family. Yet that power couldn't be fake. She must be a distant relative of the Celt family lineage. After much thought, that was the only explanation. But why did he think of his deceased wife? He remembered that when his wife was found, their child, Baiyun, shouldn't have been even 7 months old. The doctor had also said that a child in that condition had no hope of survival. However, he still followed his wife's footsteps, hoping for a miracle. Unexpectedly, he only found the child's tombstone, but not the child's remains. He hadn't realized that after so many years, he still held onto the hope that his child was alive. He felt like a failure. Meanwhile, Alyssa, having returned home, had calmed down. Someone was behind today's monster attack, and their target was Liehart. Fortunately, it hadn't even been a day since the incident. She rang the bell. An investigation team had to be assembled immediately to investigate the forest. Unexpectedly, Annie rushed into the room, calling for Alyssa, and had even bought something special. She'd heard it could repel monsters. Although the item was delicate and small, it probably wouldn't be of much use. Alyssa saw the problem at a glance. The bottom of the perfume bottle Jingran bore the royal certification mark. She wanted to laugh out of anger. On the very day monsters attacked the capital, someone just happened to be selling this kind of thing. She felt her intelligence was being insulted. Just then, her assistant arrived. She couldn't wait any longer. Please organize an investigation team to be dispatched to the forest immediately. Though they were husband and wife, they couldn't see each other. Alyssa felt empty and lonely. In the middle of the night, she ran to the solitary tower where her husband stayed and even broke a window with a stone. But today there was exceptionally good news. Liehart was being sued. The Emperor, furious, wanted to hold him accountable. After all, he was responsible for the capital's security. You have betrayed my trust. It is your negligence that has caused this tragedy. His posture suggested that Liehart absolutely had to pay a heavy price. But please wait a moment. Liehart calmly raised his hand, signaling his subordinate to bring forth something he had prepared beforehand. 2 unremarkable monster gallbladders. What do these have to do with wanting to frame you? Of course they're related. These gallbladders, which should have been in the forest, were found in the temple garden. It's clear that this monster attack on the temple was deliberately planned, and currently, only one person has benefited, the one selling the perfume. He didn't need to think twice to know. The culprit had deliberately lured the monsters and then sold his own invented monster-repelling agent. The crowd murmured, "Wasn't that Marquis Davin?" Davin hadn't expected to be exposed so quickly, but he still refused to admit defeat. He furiously accused Liehart of making false accusations. What can two gallbladders prove? But Liehart's next words silenced him completely. The day before the founding ceremony, the Viscount rented a large number of carriages. Simply examining the composition of the mud on the wheels will reveal that the Viscount visited that forest. This is just a coincidence. Duke, aren't you going too far? Liehart smirked. He had investigated the Viscount and discovered he was deeply in debt due to his invention. Yet, right after the founding ceremony and Davin's promotion to Marquis, he suddenly had the money to rent carriages. The Viscount still struggled to defend himself. Liehart then played his final card, the captured monster herder. At the same time, a ledger was handed to the Emperor. It contained all of Viscount and Marquis Davin's schemes. The Emperor merely made a casual inquiry, but the Viscount was so frightened he nearly confessed everything. "I accidentally fell into the villain's trap. You're slandering me." Marquis Davin shifted all the blame onto himself. Shufu, this son-in-law, is truly unreliable. The Emperor was furious, but had to give everyone an explanation. He only demanded that Marquis Davin compensate for the losses. Liehart raised an objection, but no commoners were injured this time, were they? The Emperor suddenly decided to act merciful and announced he would be lenient with Marquis Davin. Liehart was stunned by these words. Weren't those dozen or so dead commoners driven away by the royal family because of their social status? He accused Marquis Davin of threatening the Emperor's slaves and even fabricated a charge of treason. As for how many commoners were killed or injured, the Emperor didn't care. Liehart was so angry he wanted to hit someone, but he had to praise the Duke for his sound reasoning. Since everyone agreed with Liehart, Marquis Davin was stripped of his title and divorced from the princess. The news became a trending topic that day, but Alyssa couldn't bring herself to be happy. She was keeping the home fires burning alone, while her husband was studying notes in the tower, but he still hadn't found any information about the dark abode. This is terrible. What if I give birth, and he can't even see the baby? Just as she was thinking this, Alyssa was suddenly startled. Upon learning the truth, she was completely dumbfounded. The Temple Pope, single for 20 years, was actually her biological father. It turned out that, after seeing the Duchess use blue holy power, the Pope rescued Alyssa, because that was a unique power of the Cyril family. He asked a friend to get a paternity test kit. Just one test would reveal the answer. But he hesitated, afraid his hopes would be dashed. But no matter who the Duchess was, as long as she inherited the family's power, he had a responsibility to find out the source of the power. He placed a strand of golden algae he had managed to retrieve into a clear glass. He intended to start with the crab to confirm, but somehow he impulsively pulled out his own hair. As long as they were blood relatives with similar genetic makeup, the potion would turn blue after adding the drops. Otherwise, the potion would solidify. He thought it would solidify immediately, but the next second, he was stunned. The potion turned a snowy blue. He couldn't believe the result. The Duchess was actually his daughter. Jet black golden hair, those clear green eyes, just as his wife had described. Half like me, half like you. And we'll both love her very much, right? But his wife was dead, and his daughter had disappeared without a trace. At this moment of reunion, he completely lost control. All the guilt and longing transformed into tears of joy. His wife's wish had truly come true. Alyssa soon learned the truth as well. Ever since Liehart had been corrupted by demonic energy, he had confined himself to the tower. Overcome with longing, Alyssa secretly snuck over and knocked on the tower window in the middle of the night, seeing his wife and their baby downstairs. Liehart thought something serious had happened, but then Alyssa held up a notebook, asking if he was bored up there and if there was anything he needed. He shook his head, lying. While he wasn't one to complain, not seeing his wife every day was indeed quite inconvenient. "I'll get you out of there soon. Just bear with it a little longer." Watching his wife's silent encouragement, he realized she had come to lift his spirits. He gave a loving smile. Being stuck in a tower was truly difficult, and he hadn't found any useful clues. Then Alyssa held up the notebook again. I miss you so much. Our little one misses Daddy too. These were the words Alyssa truly wanted to say. Liehart was silent for a few seconds. Then he flew a paper airplane down to her. I miss you both too. It read, with a drawing of a dog's pitiful face. Alyssa instantly felt it was worth it. Just seeing him from afar like this wasn't bad either. But how could that compare to being with him at zero distance? So, the next day, Liehart came to the temple for his evolution. No matter how worried her husband was, worried that her pregnancy would make it difficult, it didn't matter. She insisted on waiting for him in the temple. As husband and wife, we must be inseparable, Alyssa said. Liehart smiled helplessly. He went with the Pope to the treatment room. The treatment ended quickly. The pain in his shoulder was gradually lessening, but somehow, the Pope seemed particularly displeased with him today. With a stern face, he first scolded him for neglecting his health, then blamed him for worrying his family. He even lectured him on the importance of participating in prenatal care. Liehart thought it might be his imagination. He had thought he could finally spend some quality time with his wife today, but before they could exchange more than a few words, the Pope spoke again. Duchess, could you come with me for a walk? Although Liehart was reluctant, he agreed. Watching the affectionate couple, the Pope didn't know what to say. He led Alyssa to a secluded garden. Madam, how much do you know about divine power? Alyssa thought carefully. She knew it was the power of the Serral family. She also knew that only members of the Serral family could inherit it. The Pope understood. Looking at the withered flowers, he said, "Please extend your hand and imagine watering them." Alyssa didn't understand, but she closed her eyes tightly and silently thought, "I want to water these flowers." Unexpectedly, blue light suddenly emanated from her hands. Tears streamed down her face. This is the divine power that can purify all dangerous auras. Although she had unconsciously used it a few times before, this was the first time she had realized it. "Does this power have anything to do with you?" she asked hesitantly. The Pope longed to embrace his daughter, but he restrained himself. "If your real family were still alive, could you accept that fact?" Alyssa stumbled back in shock. Was her father really the Pope? The truth of the rumors she had heard was finally revealed. Everything she thought she knew about the plot was wrong. The family she thought the original Alyssa had grown up in had nothing to do with her at all. Alyssa couldn't believe it. The original Alyssa was a fake, and Liehart had known this secret all along. When she heard the Pope was her father, she didn't know whether to be sad or happy. After all, she was just an outsider who didn't belong here. Fortunately, the Pope was a very gentle father. He didn't rush her for an answer. He only hoped she would visit the temple often, just like usual. Watching the Pope's cautiously retreating figure, she felt an indescribable sadness. She couldn't even focus when her husband read fairy tales to her and their child. "What's wrong, Alyssa?" Liehart was worried. "What did the Pope talk to you about? Tell me." She told him that the Pope was her father and that she also possessed divine power, so she didn't need to worry about being corrupted by demonic energy. She thought Liehart would be surprised, and he was for a few seconds. Liehart actually knew some things. Ansel had come to him before and told him about the photo he found while renovating the villa and what the doctor had said. The real Alyssa had died when she was 8 years old. Liehart felt guilty for his actions. He had chosen to hide the truth because he was afraid of upsetting his wife and her grandfather, the redwood forest where he had brought Alyssa back. Liehart had sent people to investigate. There wasn't a single trace of Alyssa ever having lived near there. So the question was, where had the original Alyssa lived before she was 12? As Alyssa pondered this, her husband asked her how she felt about finding her biological father. She froze. She didn't know how she felt. Her memories of her parents in her previous life were filled with coldness and hurt. Her parents had been the shadow of her childhood. She didn't understand what parents were supposed to be. And yet, this flawed version of herself now had a father. And such a gentle, powerful, and respected father. He's so conflicted, but she also knows he's a good man. She wants to get closer to understand him better. It's the first time she's felt this strange feeling. Then let's visit Father tomorrow. Lying in her husband's warm embrace, her anxiety and unease dissipated. She felt so happy in this moment. The Pope, as if sharing her thoughts, kept peeking out the temple doors from early morning. His subordinates noticed he was waiting for someone and awkwardly tried to slip away. But just as they turned, they heard the announcement of the Duchess Lublin's arrival. His face lit up with joy. But when they actually sat down to chat, both women tacitly lowered their heads in silence, occasionally stealing glances at each other. It felt awkward. Seeing this, Lionheart thought they really were alike. He broke the silence, calling the Pope father repeatedly and apologizing for not visiting yesterday. The Pope finally spoke, embarrassed, blaming himself for being too abrupt. He should be thanking them for coming to see him. But he was more concerned about the Duchess. How had you been all these years? Alyssa was momentarily startled. The formal address of Duchess and you felt unfamiliar. She wasn't used to her father being so polite. Saying the word father felt awkward. But what if she hurt his feelings? As she lowered her head, unsure how to respond, her father told her not to worry about it. It's just a title. Don't feel pressured. You can call me whatever you like. He was so gentle. She had never experienced such kindness. But she didn't remember anything before she was 12, and the book didn't describe it either. She only knew she'd been in a carriage accident as a child. When she woke up, she was in Lublin. Then she married Lionheart and started her current, shameless life. The couple exchanged sweet glances, making the Pope's heart clench. A carriage accident? But might not be entirely true. Lionheart wanted to explain everything properly later. After all, only the former Duke knew the truth about Alyssa's origins, so it was complicated. Fortunately, Alyssa was well now. The Pope's face was filled with relief. Thank you for being alive and well, he said, his hands trembling as he spoke. Alyssa saw it clearly, stuttering and hesitating for a long time. She finally responded, "It's good to see you too, though it's a bit late to say that." Her gentle smile, as she squinted her eyes, made the Pope freeze. He thought he saw his deceased wife. "We will love her very much. For our child, my wife said anything is possible." He felt his wife was right, because he felt the same way now. He felt like conquering the world for his daughter. He couldn't believe this handsome man with jet black hair dared to flirt with him so openly. But he was even more shocked that this man was his brother. After the two women acknowledged each other, the Pope bought a gold leaf and pearl hair clip as a first gift for his daughter. But he worried it might put pressure on her. Maybe I should reconsider. He left the gift on his desk and went out. Little Leon came looking for him the next moment. Dressed like a little gardener, he wanted to show the Pope his flowers. But the office was empty. However, he was quickly attracted by the golden hair clip on the desk. The emerald green leaves and white pearls were so beautiful. His sister had told him they were flower seeds. If planted in the soil, they would grow into more flowers. Little Leon was instantly energized. He wanted to grow lots and lots of flowers for the Holy Father. As happy as he was in that moment, he was just as devastated the next. The Pope, having changed his mind after his walk, decided to give his daughter the gift whether she liked it or not. He had to at least offer it. But as soon as he entered, he saw this scene. The hair clip was missing its pearls, only the leaves remained. Seeing little Leon run out, he knew instantly who the culprit was. He heard the pearls had been planted in the flower bed. He was dumbfounded. He'd never been so speechless in his life. Alyssa arrived at the temple just then. She distinctly heard little Leon say he was decorating the flower bed today, but she couldn't find him anywhere after searching for a while. She hadn't expected him to be hiding inside. The moment she saw him, the little guy's tears, which he'd been holding back, came pouring out uncontrollably. She thought something serious had happened. It turned out the little guy had broken the gift his father had given him. The Pope exclaimed that raising children was truly difficult. He had just been explaining to little Leon that they were pearl hair clips, not flower seeds. But as soon as he heard they were bought for Alyssa, little Leon started wailing. His subordinates had also come to find him for something just then. Now that he was finally free, he needed to hurry back and comfort him. He hadn't expected that when he opened the door, little Leon would be beaming with joy and excitement. But what surprised him even more was that Alyssa was already wearing the hair clips. "Look, Leon and I are matching. How do they look? Do they suit me?" "Thank you, Father. I love the gift." The Pope was stunned. All his previous worries vanished. Alyssa, for the first time, felt a father's love. She kept unconsciously touching the hair clips. Watching a happy couple on the street, she thought she should also give a gift in return. Thinking this, she and went to a jewelry store, wanting to choose a men's brooch. With her VIP status as the Duchess, she naturally went to a private room to browse. She told and to look around on her own. Unexpectedly, something happened, having accidentally stepped on her skirt and was about to fall flat on her face. Luckily, a large hand caught her around the waist. "Miss, are you all right?" It was a handsome gentleman. Just as she was about to thank him, she felt an inappropriate caress on her waist. she instantly realized something was wrong. The gentleman now had a wicked smile on his face. While speaking words of concern, his hands didn't stop, and a young girl was terrified. She stammered, unable to speak. Let go of her. Alyssa appeared just in time, scolding the man for being shameless and daring to touch a girl without her consent. Hearing the words touch without consent, the prideful blonde man became agitated. He claimed he was just helping her check for injuries. But if she didn't like it, it was considered assault. The blonde man hadn't expected this woman to be so imposing. He had just wanted to flirt with a girl, but now his plan was ruined. Seeing the little maid cowering, he asked, "Did I do anything to upset you?" He was certain the maid was too scared to speak. As long as she remained silent, he could get away with it. And was indeed terrified, so scared that it was difficult to utter a single word. However, the next moment, "I want to be hit on by you, you pervert." Her voice was deafening. The blonde man became the center of everyone's attention. Alyssa explained the situation to the approaching shop assistants. The blonde man was furious. He felt insulted being called a pervert. He was shocked when a shop assistant stopped him and asked him to leave. It turned out this woman had a higher social standing than him. He could only leave angrily, seeing and crying her eyes out. Alyssa just wanted to know which family that man belonged to. The shop assistant answered nervously. That was a member of the Celester family. Alyssa was stunned. Melissa, that scumbag, was actually her cousin. They're finally, after 7 years of marriage. However, a new scheme was also brewing. After and was harassed by that blonde man. Alyssa had asked her father about him, but her father described the blonde man as a capable and obedient young man. If it weren't for yesterday's incident, she would have actually believed him. That kind of person was either a capable scumbag or a scumbag skilled at managing appearances. She decided to go back and investigate further. Unexpectedly, as she looked up, she was captivated by someone. Liehart was with little Leon. His serious and handsome back was so adorable. Alyssa couldn't help but smile that it seems you really like him. Father said that when you look at someone you like, you radiate happiness. Both her father, the Pope, and the Marchioness saw right through her. Looking at Liehart, Alyssa finally understood. She really did like Liehart. If she wasn't sure before, it was crystal clear now. A strong sense of peace settled over her. "Alyssa, why is your face so red?" Her husband's voice snapped her out of her reverie. Afraid of being found out, she turned and fled. Liehart was left dumbfounded. Did I do something wrong? Having received advice from his father-in-law, he hurried after her. Their retreating figures, one after the other. It's good to be young. That night, Alyssa needed to send her husband away. Liehart was bewildered again. "Can I sleep on the sofa?" "No, you have to go to another room." Because if he didn't, she really wouldn't be able to resist. She couldn't imagine how wild she might become. But Liehart, looking utterly dejected, wanted her to finish reading him a story before he left. Blushing even more deeply than before, she firmly refused. "If I upset you, I apologize." Liehart's pitiful expression was utterly disarming. She hesitated for 2 seconds. "Fine, let's sleep together." Watching her husband quickly tidy up the bed, she repeated to herself, "He's my husband. So even if he does that, it's okay." The burning desire within her could no longer be contained. She stood on tiptoe and cupped her husband's face. You definitely wouldn't want to see what happened next. So, let's fast forward to the next morning. Liehart was filled with regret. Because of the baby, he had been very careful. He was annoyed and frustrated. Then, at breakfast, he was stunned. His wife was telling him to take better care of himself, with a strange, knowing expression. He instantly understood what she meant. She thought he wasn't virile. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. So, as soon as his wife finished eating, he scooped her up into his arms. "I think it's necessary to clear up this misunderstanding, my lady. This dangerous atmosphere." Alyssa absolutely loved it, but the sweet days quickly passed. Today, she went to the temple as usual. However, people were looking at her strangely. They even started whispering in front of her, asking a young acolyte. She learned that someone was spreading a rumor that she was having an affair with the Pope. She couldn't believe such an absurd rumor existed. Her father wanted to talk to her, but the young acolyte stopped him. "Oh, you want the rumors to get even worse?" For the first time, the woman showed her true strength, successfully stunning everyone. No one could believe it. Despite the rumors of an affair with an old man from the temple, she had become the next head of the Celester family. As the ugly rumors spread throughout the empire, the Pope was filled with guilt and self-reproach. Although reluctant, his daughter was pregnant. So, it was best she not come to the temple anymore. As the two were saying their goodbyes, Lionheart appeared. He had gone to the imperial palace today, but now he was here. This meant the rumors had reached the palace as well. Alyssa felt responsible. Lionheart didn't seem to care. He even had a solution. Looking at his stunned father-in-law, he asked, "Do you trust me?" A week later, at the Crown Prince's birthday party, Lionheart became the center of attention. As the next head of the Celester family, his presence at the royal banquet surprised everyone. It was said that the temple and the royal family kept their distance. The head of the Celester family, especially after becoming pope, never participated in royal events. After all, something had happened 20 years ago. However, Lionheart being here meant that the Celester family had decided to get closer to the royal family. The attention pleased Lionheart. He had deliberately antagonized the royal family before to gain the current head of the family's trust. But now, Aiden and Alyssa were the subject of unsavory rumors, causing the family to doubt the current head's competence. So, Cain was busy consolidating his position. He approached the Crown Prince a week ago. As long as the Crown Prince was willing to support him, he would make Aiden miserable within the family. That's why he received the invitation to the banquet. He thought the current head of the family didn't care much about family matters, so he assumed Celester was his for the taking. Unexpectedly, a commotion arose. Count and Countess Lou made a dazzling entrance. Alyssa, instead of hiding at home, was chatting animatedly with other women. This woman was truly shameless. Cain decided to make his presence known. "Duchess, we meet again." He was polite and gentlemanly. Alyssa, however, pretended not to remember. "You're the man who laid hands on my maid at the jewelry store." "That was just a misunderstanding, but I saw it with my own two eyes. You clearly laid hands on my maid." Murmurs rippled through the surrounding crowd. Cain hadn't expected this woman to be so crazy, but he still wanted to morally pressure her to salvage the situation. Bringing this up constantly isn't good for your maid either, is it? Alyssa didn't understand. Why should the victim hide when you're the one who did wrong? With a few words, Cain became the center of attention again. Just as he was racking his brains for a counterattack, the royals made their formal entrance. He decided to stop provoking the vicious woman. After all, he had more important things to do. He didn't know that Alyssa would take everything from him. The nobles came forward one by one to present birthday gifts. Next, it was Celester's turn. But at this crucial moment, a subordinate delivered a letter from Pope Aiden. The emperor intended to read it after the banquet, but the letter's contents concerned the heir. He was stunned when he saw what was written. "From this day forward, Aiden revokes Cain's position as heir and appoints my daughter, Alyssa Lublin, as the next head of the family." The emperor's expression caught everyone's attention. Under their puzzled gazes, Alyssa strode forward. She bowed politely and elegantly that "I, Alyssa, Celester, formally greet your majesty." The entire banquet erupted that she the Celester families or the Pope's illegitimate daughter. "No, this is impossible." Cain completely broke down. "How can a woman involved in a scandal with the Pope become the next head of Celester? How dare you deceive the emperor?" Suddenly, a ball of water coalesced in Alyssa's palm, and it grew larger and larger. He was dumbfounded. This is the true Celester divine power. Alyssa confidently crushed the water sphere. "As a direct descendant of the family, I naturally inherited the family's power." The true heir had appeared. Someone, however, had gone mad. The emperor was furious, practically seething with rage. Seeing her plan succeed, Alyssa smiled triumphantly and departed with an elegant curtsy. Cain suppressed his fury. He had to go to the Pope immediately and demand an explanation. That crazy girl dared to steal his Celester. He would make her pay dearly. However, he was stopped by soldiers outside the temple. He yelled and screamed, trying to use his status as heir to force his way in. But, unfortunately, the soldiers had already received their orders. The next head of the family had changed. He refused to accept it, acting like a spoiled brat and insisting on entering the temple. The Pope appeared at that moment, his expression filled with disappointment. Cain clung to the last shred of hope. The absurd events at the banquet today, but they weren't real, were they? He thought the current head had chosen to do this to cover up something. But it's all true. I have revoked your inheritance. The Pope spoke with a hint of remorse. It was his fault for entrusting the position of family head to such an incompetent person. With his last hope shattered, Cain couldn't accept it. His entire upbringing had revolved around becoming the head of the family. How could he willingly let it go? But the position of family head cannot be given to someone like you. Alyssa appeared at this moment. Because of the incident at the jewelry store, she had investigated Cain's actions over the years. The residents of his territory spoke highly of Cain, and it was said he handled affairs quite competently. Cain was devastated. While Alyssa had been playing princess games, he had already been capable of taking charge. But Alyssa knew more than what appeared on the surface. In reality, Cain was a real womanizer. Not only the residents of his territory, but women from other territories had also suffered at his hands. Although he appeared to be a talented and handsome young man, he had committed countless misdeeds. Yet, Cain didn't seem to think it was a big deal. "It's just playing with a few women," he said, poking Alyssa's shoulder. "When I was establishing this territory, you were still in the Duke's mansion, wearing pretty dresses and eating sweet cookies." The Duchess's meager sense of justice couldn't save the people. Lionheart wanted to step forward and stop Cain, but Alyssa blocked him. He sighed in frustration, too tired to explain how powerful he was. His expression suddenly darkened. "Just watch and see how I prove whether I can save the people or not." Unexpectedly, his arrogant defiance provoked Cain, who raised his hand to slap him while cursing. But Lionheart snapped his fingers with a flourish, and Cain was swept up by the wind, performing an involuntary acrobatic display in the air before crashing unceremoniously into a flower bed. Thompson, throw him back to the Marquis's mansion. Following Lionheart's order, two knights enthusiastically hauled the struggling Cain away. "Alyssa, are you all right?" Her father was extremely dejected, blaming himself for neglecting family matters and his poor judgment. "But it's not your fault that others abuse their power." Before Alyssa could finish comforting her father, she heard Lionheart call her name. Looking up, she saw the Marchioness. Judging by her imposing demeanor, Alyssa thought she was looking for trouble. But in the next second, the Marchioness rushed forward and embraced her. The Marchioness was overjoyed. She finally understood why Alyssa reminded her of Yulia. "Thank you for being alive, my child." The wicked emperor finally went mad after learning the truth. He had thought she was the daughter of a country viscount, but she was the Pope's only heir and had even inherited the divine power. She had also married into the Lublin family and become the Duchess. The fusion of the powerful forces of wind and water made the emperor sense a threat. "Remer, what do you think about that prophecy?" he asked. "I remember the prophecy said, 'Prophecies exist to be changed,'" Remer replied. His words made the emperor fall into deep thought. If he wanted to prevent the prophecy from coming true, perhaps a new future would emerge. Remer said he would find a way, which reassured the emperor. However, the emperor didn't know that Remer's true loyalty lay elsewhere. The plan had been going smoothly, but then a girl suddenly appeared. Could it be that the king's power hasn't fully recovered? He had a premonition that the girl would ruin everything. To regain all of the king's power, he had to eliminate her. Meanwhile, the young couple remained unaware of the impending danger. Although Alyssa had lost her mother, she gained a Marchioness who immediately recognized her as her daughter, given her princess status. She even scolded Aiden for revealing the truth too late. Fortunately, the outcome was a happy and sweet one. Alyssa soon arrived at the Celester family estate, where her father warmly welcomed her. The entire family respectfully bowed to her. Although they addressed her as the future head of the family, her sharp green eyes keenly perceived that they were all wary of her. After her identity was revealed, her father, to save face for Cain, not only personally handled the matter, but also gave Cain time to leave. However, Cain couldn't appreciate this kindness and stubbornly refused to leave the Celester estate. In the end, he was expelled. The family members didn't understand what had happened, but they didn't want to have anything to do with Alyssa, the supposed culprit. They certainly didn't want her to inherit the position of head of the family. After all, in their eyes, the seemingly excellent heir had been driven away by the wicked Alyssa. Just as she was feeling speechless, the butler stepped forward to welcome her. Head of the Celester family, I am the butler, Frederick. As expected of a seasoned butler, Alyssa appreciated his professionalism. He could have easily remained neutral, but he chose to approach her to assess whether she was qualified to be the head of the Celester family. This showed that he wasn't a butler serving a particular individual, but one dedicated to the entire family. Such a person was definitely worth having on her side. She soon had a chance to demonstrate her abilities. The head maid, who had been a devoted fan of her mother, thoughtfully prepared afternoon tea. Hearing from her father that these were all her mother's favorite treats, she couldn't help but feel touched. She had initially thought the head maid, Camilla, was frighteningly taciturn, but she hadn't expected her to be so thoughtful. At this moment, the butler delivered a letter. It was a letter of protest from Count Vicenna, threatening to sever trade between their territories and bring back the stolen residents. The letter demanded action. Before her father could finish reading, Alyssa instinctively voiced her thoughts. Vicenna was a territory bordering Celester, their mountains connecting to the Count's Ridge. As far as she knew, the Count had long sought access to the Marquis Ridge, but a few years ago, they had joined forces to suppress bandits. How about having the toll fees for him? Count Vicenna was notoriously stingy. That's why he was unwilling to increase protection fees, leading to the loss of his residents. Now he wanted to extort Celester. Although the Count is at fault, the people ultimately suffer. Having the toll fees may seem like a loss for Celester, but in the long run, it will not only increase trade between the two territories, but also bring greater profits to Celester. With increased trade volume, the losses from the reduced toll fees can be turned into profit. We might even be able to eliminate those troublesome bandits. She spoke with such passion that her father stared at her in astonishment, and even the seasoned butler exclaimed, "Oh my God!" He hadn't expected her to have such insightful judgment. Seeing their expressions, she wondered if she had overdone it. She was anxious. After all, she wasn't officially the head of the family yet. At 22 years old, this was the first time she had seen her deceased mother, even if it was only a portrait. But she learned from the head maid that her mother, Alyssa, was a kind and responsible woman. On the day she stepped into Celester as the Shao family head, with just a few analyses and insights, she successfully earned the praise of her father and the old butler. Her father adopted her ideas regarding the Marquis territory dispute and immediately instructed the old butler to carry them out. She was shocked and apprehensive, feeling like she had just spoken casually. It was a solution that didn't provoke any conflict and benefited everyone involved. Her father greatly approved of her abilities. "Alyssa, you just need to lead Celester as you led Lublin, because this is also your home. These people are also your people." Alyssa then realized that this mansion was now her home too. She gladly accepted everything. A month had passed in a blink of an eye. The vassals and servants who were once wary of her were now impressed by her outstanding management skills. Even the servants who were overlooked by Cain now had new uniforms, and their dormitories were completely renovated. This was all a result of Alyssa's meticulous management. Everyone naturally regarded her as the heir. Today, she wanted to learn about the history of Celester. The head maid, Camilla, stepped forward to explain. "These portraits on the wall are of the 6 generations of family heads. Your father became the head at the same age you are now, Alyssa. And on a very cold winter day, your mother brought back Camilla, who was about to be sold by your father. That's why Camilla's heart belongs only to Celester." Alyssa had heard this story from her father. "Thank you so much. The way you speak is very similar to my mother's." Camilla couldn't help but shed tears. After a brief moment of fluster, Camilla introduced the last portrait. "These two are the first and second generation heads of the family, Lilia." Centuries have passed, but Alyssa felt an inexplicable longing for Lilia. Camilla's voice brought her back to reality. The day's work was over, and she had to rush back to Lublin. The butler was worried. Some things can wait until after the delivery. But Alyssa not only wanted to be a good mother, she also wanted to be a capable head of the family. But a conspiracy was also brewing. Cain was unwilling to have everything taken away from him. Hiding in the shadows, he became increasingly twisted, muttering, "I'm going to kill her. Some people are drawn to the scent of trouble. It seems you're in need of my assistance." Seeing Cain still looking fierce, someone asks, "Do you need my help?" Meanwhile, on the other side of the conspiracy, the sweet couple is just 2 months away from their baby's arrival, or a little over a month if things progress quickly. Listening to the doctor's advice against overexertion, Liehart felt a pang of Shinkung for his wife, who would have to endure immense pain while he could do nothing. But Alyssa had an idea regarding Liehart's hair. She'd heard that some women in labor clutch their husband's hair in pain. Liehart had so much hair, surely a little trim wouldn't matter. After the doctor left, she asked her husband expectantly, "Will our baby be a boy or a girl?" Liehart hoped for a girl, as beautiful as Alyssa. But having seen the round table, he knew it would be a son. "And as handsome as you," Alyssa added. "But am I handsome?" Liehart seemed to be only just realizing this fact. Alyssa, speechless, started listing examples of people who were captivated by him. Just as she was getting into it, a shadow fell over her. Liehart gently wrapped his arms around Alyssa's waist. "What about you? Do you think I'm handsome?"